Awesome. So tea is almost ready. So just know that even when we are during the discussion, you can go ahead and grab your chai and idli and the salad and enjoy and listen to our healthy discussion today as well. I'm Nazira. This is our 22nd session of the Chai and Just Chat. We've somehow done it with your support and the sponsor support every month on different topics of community. I see some of our panelists there, so thank you for attending, for finding the inspiration to be here on a Sunday afternoon. Today's topic is very important. I was going to ask the panelists, should I ask them to define men or heart? I said defining men is not going to be easy. So we said, okay, let's settle for the heart, right? How many of you, and I want you all to be frank, how many of you all have, including the panelists, how many of you all have had your heart broken? See, the ones sitting next to their wives are not going to lift their hands. Right? So that over the years, that's easier to mend, right? Life moves on. But once our heart is broken due to any other illnesses or because of our bad habits or behaviors, that's going to be very hard to mend. So that's what we're going to discuss on how to prevent those. The good thing is we can do or take measures to prevent heart disease. So I would like to quickly introduce the list, and you'll see their profile going this side. To my left is Gregory Bolden. I know him since I was in Fulton County, probably 4 or 5 years ago. So it's almost a decade since we know each other. And he does an awesome job with Men's Health Initiative. And then Umang, thank you so much for being here. Umang is a tax accountant. Apart from that, I've seen him providing his insight to financial advising and planning as well, on especially with the South Asian community. So thank you, Umang. And you'll see their detailed profile going on as well. We have Vidya Nagaraj, and Vidya, you will have a lot to offer to this panel and the audience because you are the nurse, registered nurse, and you get to see the real side of some of us when we are sick. And we are sometimes really, how many of you are really in a good mood when you're sick in a hospital? Not really. So, oh, good. See, we have an inspiration. So that's where Vidya comes in and takes care of us. So thank you. Dr. Ashfaq, thank you so much for being here. A practicing cardiologist with so many hats that I read as I read your profile. Your insight is going to be really valuable here. Probably not the youngest, but I'm younger than him. But Sanjeev Kumar is a rising freshman at University of Virginia, and also the founder of Whole Fit for youth physical activity improvement nonprofit. So thank you, Sanjeev, for being here. You're doing okay? You just came back from India? Okay, good. Okay, good. Dr. Neil is no new stranger, is not a stranger. Very one of the group that has attended throughout the Chai and Just Chats, inspires and gives good feedback. Retired cardiologist, but they always say those who carry this. So I think he really carries a lot of wisdom, which I would love for you to share with us today. Senator Anjuman, it's been a pleasure. We've crossed paths during the public health field when I used to be in Fulton County government, and you were the senator then, and you're also in the health committee of the Georgia Senate. We would love to see hear what you would, what you do as a senator in the health committee as we go with the discussion. Dr. Tahir, probably it's going to be your thoughts today is going to be very real, and for many of us who lose hope, but we hope that you're going to give us more hope why to stay healthy and never to give up. Peter, thank you so much for being here. And Peter, if I always remember your name as a badminton player, I think usually it's famous in India. I don't, but coming from Malaysia, you can tell us more about how you continue to remain fit. Shivani, thank you. Between Delhi and India, between Delhi and US at Emory Global Health Diabetes Program, your epidemiology statistical knowledge is going to help us understand
what differences between men and women in chronic diseases. So thank you. Dr. Dan, probably one of the pioneers in chronic disease prevention. Thank you for taking the time, and your offering or your thoughts and insights is going to be really helpful today because you bring a perspective from global or the national wide of why things work and why things are not working, and what have you done to make it work in the public health field. So thank you for being here. Chai is ready, so you all are welcome to probably come behind to grab to eat because it's hot. And if any of the panelists would love to get some chai, please feel free to go and get it. So, Doctor, before we go deep dive into most of the discussions on heart disease, so they can't hear me, Brandon. You can hear me.
Brandon.
Yes, they couldn't hear me.
Is it better? It's better.
Yeah, okay. So, no.
You want to use this one?
Okay, it's working now. So, let me know when the lapel is working. Yeah?
No, use this one.
Yes, it's something.
So before we dive deep into the discussion in heart disease, what does it mean? Dr. Neil, tell us in layman's terms. We know myocardial infarction, probably 80% of those sitting here, but in layman's terms, heart attack, cardiac arrest, coronary artery disease, coronary heart disease.
I think the first thing is to know is that everybody dies of cardiac arrest. That's the ultimate event, 100%. But really, that's not what we're talking about.
Can you hear him?
The angina is the lack of adequate blood to the heart muscle. You get chest pain, and we call it angina. And when the problem continues, when there is a complete closure or almost complete closure of the blood vessel that supplies blood to the heart, then you get myocardial infarction, also known as heart attack. And if the problem is not treated adequately or not treated immediately, that can lead to cardiac arrest, meaning if the heart muscle is not getting blood, it cannot function, so it stops. And that's called cardiac arrest. So this could be a series of events, starts with chest pain, angina, myocardial infarction, heart attack, cardiac arrest as the ultimate event.
Okay. So from what I heard from you, cardiac arrest is sudden death. Okay. So usually people say they're dying of cardiac arrest, and people are getting confused with heart attacks and cardiac arrest. So what you are telling us is two different things. Heart attacks usually takes time, and we'll discuss that.
Yes, angina usually takes a long time. Heart attack, depending upon where you live and all the other things, if you live closer to a hospital, your chance of making it is much higher. Depending upon which part of the heart muscle is involved, that also makes a difference. And then if the problem is very severe, or if it is not treated adequately or on time, then that will lead to cardiac arrest.
Okay, sounds good. So, Gregory, I have a question for you. This is a general question for all the panelists. I wanted to make sure we get the definitions right before we went into the thing. So, if you had to give every human being one quality, what would it be and why? And I want this to be quick between all the panelists.
A stress-free life.
Why? And you can look at the audience and speak.
One of the things, and the doctors, they can attest to this. You know, you go into the doctor's office and you're sitting there and they're having a conversation with the physician is having a conversation with you. And this is true for men. I don't know about women. Maybe y'all don't do this. They'll walk in and say, Mr. Jones, how are you feeling? He says, fine. Well, we don't understand that fine is freaked out, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. But fine says that, oh, I'm okay, I'm all right. But we're not taking into consideration all those stress factors that we're faced with. The fact that we have to pay bills every day. We've just driven in Atlanta traffic. We walk in and then the nurse takes our blood pressure. Our blood pressure is 150/92. And she's sitting there and just like, oh, well, your blood pressure is elevated. Well, we're sitting there. If we wait 5 minutes or so, we get a chance to relax, take it again. It's back to normal.
Right.
or close to normal, somewhere near 120 over 80.
Got it.
What has happened? We're under stress. But we
Sure.
don't really understand that that stress factor is ongoing, and that plays a significant role on our heart
Great. Okay.
and the influence that we have on our daily lives.
Great, got it. Thank you, Gregory. And if the panelists can look at the audience while answering, and this is a general quick question. So, Umang, the same question goes to you. If there's
Sure.
one quality you want to give a human being, what would it be and why?
A sound, sustainable financial contingency plan.
I would like everybody to be happy because once you're happy, that solves a lot of things. It's very simple. So,
Very nice.
And I would go with a healthy life, a long and healthy life.
Healthy one, okay.
I would say more so a hopeful life, just because a lot of times we work hard to maintain proper health as well as we work hard to make sure that we live a proper life. However, things can happen. And a lot of times it's easy to lose that hope and to lose sight of what really matters. So a hopeful life is what I'd say.
Great. Dr. Neo?
I think the ultimate thing is the happiness. If you are sick, if you're unhealthy, you are not happy. If you have stress, you are not happy. I think you need to find qualities that makes you happy. If you're unhappy, find the reason why you're unhappy, and then correct those things and you'll be happy. And that will help the heart also.
Sure, thank you. Senator, so your question is, what is one thing you wish your parents had said to you growing up?
Is this working? No? I think my parents grew up during the Depression. As a matter of fact, I knew they did, and they only had a 6th grade education. So they had 5 children, and they instilled in their children to be progressive, finish school. But I think the one thing that they emphasized to us is to never forget where you came from, and that all people are equal and just alike, and to treat people the way you want to be treated.
Very nice. Dr. Tahir?
If this is working. Yes, it is. Any activity or lifestyle change you decide, remember not to expect instant gratification. Because it'll always come. It'll come in the long run. And when it does come, it'll be awesome.
Very nice. Peter? Release the mic.
Well, this brings back to about a week ago, I attended a New York life insurance seminar, and it was about retirement security and happiness. What defines happiness for a retiree, active adult, is one, is to be healthy. Number 2 is financial stability. You need to have the money always. But perhaps most importantly is your relationship with your spouse. You can be very healthy, very, very wealthy, but you don't get along. You're in trouble.
I hear some claps out there. Shivani?
Yeah, an important lesson my parents taught me was to face challenges bravely rather than run away from them. And I think that's a lesson that serves many, many dimensions of our life well, but also this issue of how do we deal with chronic disease, how do we prevent chronic disease. So I think that there's a nice linkage in that one.
Thank you.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. What is one thing you wish your parents had said to you growing up?
The one thing my parents, well, I think they pretty much said everything I wanted them to say, and they did emphasize education, and they wanted me to learn to treat others the way I would want to be treated, and to treat all people as equal to me and equal to each other. I have a lot of respect for my parents.
Okay, very nice. Thank you, Dr. Dan. So, Dr. Ashfaq, I want to go, I'm going to give you that mic.
So there are a lot of different ways heart disease can present. So it can occur in patients who absolutely have no symptoms at all, but that's less common. There are also patients who get warning symptoms, and Dr. Neal elaborated on angina symptoms, chest discomfort or heaviness or tightness, often occurring when you're doing stuff with activity and you notice you go up a hill or you do something more strenuous and you get some heaviness in your chest, and sometimes it'll move to different parts of the body, radiate towards the arm, the left shoulder, the left arm, the neck, sometimes the jaw. Those are the symptoms that we often tell patients to be on the lookout for, and sometimes there's associated shortness of breath, and there may be some sweatiness or clamminess, occasionally dizziness. So this constellation of symptoms in all sorts of combinations can be indicative of some sort of heart issue. Now, in a stable state, when it's not a heart attack, the patients may have these symptoms. They may come and go in spurts, and that's when often people should get checked out in the office. Now, sometimes these symptoms will either suddenly get worse without warning or occur for the first time in the setting of a heart attack, when patients will then start having continuous symptoms, often when they're not doing very much, doesn't get relieved with rest, but could be doing all the same things with shortness of breath, with sweatiness, with clamminess, moving to the arm, the neck, the shoulder. And if it doesn't improve, that's one of the recommendations to, call 911, go into the emergency room, because there's not a good way at home to decide on your own if it's a heart attack or if it's something less serious. If it is a heart attack, there are different types of heart attacks. Some of them can be treated initially with medication, stabilized, and then figure things out while in the emergency room. Some of them need immediate, urgent attention based on the EKG changes, and then they go immediately for an emergent heart catheterization and angioplasty. And
So we'll
things
go
like
into
that.
the treatment part during the next round. But tell us if there's any differences in the signs and symptoms of a heart disease or a cardiac arrest for men and women. And when should any of us just go see a cardiologist, or when should we go see a cardiologist?
So there are a lot of studies show that these classic description of symptoms that I just gave probably apply more to men than women. Women may have just milder degrees of chest discomfort, maybe a little arm pain or shoulder pain, maybe the neck or jaw may all be that hurt. So it's recommended that just any of these combination of symptoms in women could be an early sign, but the classic heaviness and elephant sitting on the chest and going to the arm, that tends to happen more in men than in women. So that's one difference. As far as the second part,
When should any of us just go visit a cardiologist?
well, definitely if you're having any of these symptoms, it's worth getting checked, and you don't want to wait till it's so bad that you have to go to the emergency room. So, any unexplained chest discomfort, shortness of breath, that's a sign to talk to your doctor, get into the cardiologist, perhaps the need for a stress test and things like that. And if you're having more severe symptoms, then you don't want to wait to go to a cardiologist the next day or the next week. You want to go to the emergency room right away.
Okay, and so that sounds good. Thank you so much for your answer. And basically, you're saying that a cardiologist, because some of us say we have gas. I've heard men or women say gas for 2 or 3 days, and they feel uncomfortable. What precaution do you want? If you can tell the audience what precaution they should take depending on age or risk factors involved, that, hey, this is just not your usual gas.
Well, people who have, there are other reasons to have chest discomfort, but not all of them are necessarily could be serious or life-threatening. So it's sometimes hard to figure out what exactly is going on, and some patients may think it's gas and may turn out to be heart problems. Other patients may think it's a heart problem and turns out to be gas. So the best bet is if you're having symptoms and you really don't, and it's not really something clear-cut, like it's not related to eating, or, it's not something that you did something really strenuous and started having some, muscular type chest pain, things like that. It's hard to do the figuring out on your own because there's a lot of overlap in the symptoms. So the best bet is go to a medical professional who can then help sort it out, and they can dig deeper, ask you some more detailed questions, and determine, is it something that needs to be pursued further, or is it something, that you need to, basically not worry about. And sometimes it's not even as clear-cut for the medical professional, and so they'll set you up for some more detailed testing, which will help point them in the right direction? Is it more likely to be heart problems based on the stress test results, or is it, the stress test results may come back okay, then they'll point you in a different direction?
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much for that explanation. So I have a quiz for the audience today. And if any of you can answer this right, and I hope Neelam is here, she's going to pass out the gift. Neelam? I can't see her from here. But she's going to pass out the gift later. So how many times does a heart beat in a lifetime? And I have 3 choices. Okay, how many times does a heart beat in a lifetime? 2.5 million A, B is 2.5 billion, C is 2.5 trillion. How many of you, okay, how many of you say A? Neelam is going to figure out who got their hands up first. Okay, how many of you say B? Oh my gosh, Neelam, I'm going to leave it to you. So the answer is B. So because it beats 100,000 times per day, and an average lifespan, it goes up to 2.5 billion times. So, Neelam, I have no, that's why I put you in charge. Yes, the present, whoever got their hands up first. Next time we'll do it much better. Okay, so Dr. Dan, what are the risk factors for developing heart disease? We know the common risk factors, and I'm going to let you mention some of those, and some of those we might not even have thought of. But what I want to dig deep is, we know these are the risk factors, but we continue to do and take up those bad habits, and we're talking about men today, right? Women are somewhat cautious, not to discriminate. But in spite of knowing, I hear things like, "Do din ka zindagi hai." That means just 2 days of life. We just have 2 days, so enjoy, eat, live happy, and then, you should go. You can't restrict yourself, not do this, don't do this, don't do that, don't do that. But let's get to the risk factors, and how can we activate the knowledge so patients or the community takes action to work on those risk factors.
So,
and you can look at the audience.
I'm wondering if, yeah, okay. I think this is one of those microphones that fades in and out, so if I kind of put it right in my mouth, it might be all right. We might mention, first of all, what is a risk factor? A risk factor is some factor that's associated with the disease that we're talking about, in this case, heart disease. There are modifiable risk factors, there are non-modifiable risk factors. So age is a risk factor. The older you get, the higher the probability that you're going to have heart disease or cancer or diabetes or any of the other chronic diseases that we're concerned with. So we're interested in modifiable risk factor. You can't modify your age, it just happens.
I could.
But you're special.
I'm just kidding.
You're special, so you can do that. But for the rest of us, we're just sort of stuck. And I think we know about some of them. Sedentary lifestyle, not getting exercise, is a risk factor. Smoking is a risk factor. A diet that's high in saturated fat is a risk factor. So we want to modify those risk factors that are modifiable, but we want to know about risk factors that are not modifiable, that affect us, that make us more attentive to those modifiable risk factors. So being a South Asian male is a risk factor compared to being white, compared to being an Asian from some other part of Asia, Vietnam, Japan, China. So the men in this audience, I think, need to ask themselves, am I doing everything I can to prevent heart disease because I'm at high risk just by virtue of who I am?
Let's try this. So let's just keep.
We South Asians have certain risk factors which are quite different from the others. Make no mistake, there's studies done that we have got smaller coronaries, we have got low good cholesterol, and that is not very functional. We have got LDL, which is high, which is atherogenic. That means it causes more clots. And when I had my heart disease at a young age of 56 years old, I was not obese in the true sense, in the conventional sense of the word. My body mass index, which is what you take your weight and you take your height and calculate, was 25. If you're 26 and below, you're not obese according to the conventional sense. From 26 to 30 BMI, you are obese. And after that, you're morbidly obese. So I was not obese, but I had visceral obesity. I had my paunch coming out around here. So I did have visceral obesity, and that is another factor. And besides the LDL, the bad cholesterol we have high, the HDL, and also we consume a lot of simple carbohydrates. Because you say we are vegetarians, but these are all processed carbohydrates. And I just read recently that India is one of the biggest consumers of sugar in the world.
Sure. So I'll give it back to Dr. Dan. Dr. Dan, thank you, Dr. Tahir, for adding on. We talked about how can we activate the patients or the community to work on preventing heart diseases. So probably going against the risk factors that they have, the ones you said modifiable. We can educate all the while, but they have to get it when they go home or they're with their family.
So what you're
So
asking,
basically the communication, yes.
yeah, what you're asking people to do is one of the hardest things that we have to do as adults, and that's to change our lifestyle, to change our diet. And all of us, from whatever background we have kind of a traditional diet. You ask about our parents. It's the food that our parents fed us that we want to eat. You know, I love my mother dearly, but I hate to tell you about some of the things she fed me. So I had... gentleman here asked about meat and potatoes. My mother made me fat sandwiches. She carved the fat off a piece of beef and fry it up a little bit, put it on a piece of white bread, and make it a sandwich for me. So I don't eat those anymore. I've had to change my diet. I got a lot of exercise when I was a kid. As an adult, it is harder. We have jobs, many of us, that require us to sit at a desk all day. So we have to find a way to work exercise into our lives. If we have started using tobacco, whether that's cigarettes or pipes or bidi, we have to find a way to stop doing that. These are really difficult things, and so it's really important to start your kids off on the right track. And I want to say that because one of the things that I am is a pediatrician, and so I focus on kids. And until I retired, and even still, I worked at Morehouse School of Medicine. We took medical students into the community and gave them the opportunity to interact with adults and kids in the community. We took them into an elementary school in southeast Atlanta, where the curriculum coordinator there told us that they had a half hour a day to teach kids science, and they had some science books that had been issued that had never come off the shelves because the teachers didn't know how to teach science, and they didn't teach health, and they didn't teach nutrition, and they just turned that over to the medical students. The medical students taught these kids nutrition for a half hour once a week, which is the time that they had. Totally inadequate, but that's what they had. So you might think about what your kids are learning, where they're learning it, what their nutrition is like, and if we can work that into the school system, then we're that much farther down the road.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. Vidya, the next question is for you. And my question is, excuse me, so did y'all, tell me if this is true or false. Did you know that married men live longer than single men? And wait, it gets better. So single women live longer than married women, and I wonder why. Is that true? But wait, that's not the real question, right? Okay. So research does find whatever I said is true. And because married men have their wives nagging at them, go visit the doctor, do this, eat well, and you got to take care in a good way, good nagging. So my question is, how do you deal with your patients or family members who are not compliant, non-adherent to medications, and culturally, sometimes you just take it at your own pace. You don't listen to the doctor's advice. Sometimes we say, like, what does he or she know? I know my life better. So how do you deal with those patients when you see them? Because it happens in our own families sometimes.
Well, usually when we do get patients with resistance to whatever is being offered, we have to take into account the background of the patient, because sometimes there's so much happening behind the scenes and your focus is just on, this is what you're admitted for, I'm just not worried about what else is going on in your life, but this is the medicine I need you to take. It is not going to work, because somebody has to take the time to find out what is driving the patient's health. And it might be simple. They might have a very bad relationship at home. So when you have a bad relationship at home, and I'm just telling, and like you said, good nagging and bad nagging, but then he's going to be like, I can't stand this woman. So why am I going to take any medicine and do anything? Because, what is all this about? So most often we try to take into account the family dynamics. That's a better way of putting it. So a family dynamics, what drives them, and also the cultural background, because many of us feel like, well, I really don't want to believe, I rather go with Ayurvedic or homeopathic medications. Both have, good and bad. So then it becomes a question of talking to them and saying, okay, we agree you can do all of that, but at this point of time, you also need to take some of this. So it's a kind of a fine line, and as nurses, because we get to spend more time with the patients when the doctor walks away, there might be a lot more to it. So then we'll have to tell the doctors, we may need to kind of modify things a little bit, because otherwise you're not going to get compliance. So I think there's a lot of teaching that goes into it, and explanation as to what happens if they don't get compliant, how bad things can get. And sometimes that kind of helps them understand better. The doctor just walk in and say, this is what I need you to do, and they walk away and they have all these million questions they want answered. So I think a lot has to do with education, but understanding the background and the knowledge base they have, because what you talk might go just over their head. They don't understand, and then we can't fault them for that.
Okay, thank you. Sounds good. So teaching just the husband or along with the family members?
Yeah, you always have to involve the family, because that's the dynamic that's very important. So they are the people who will, be it a man or a woman, so they would be the person keeping on top of it to say, okay, are you compliant? Did you take your medicine? Did you, whatever you need to do. So family dynamics is very important. And sometimes you have elderly people. Oh, my mother told me no. So what do you know? I just married you, but my mom has raised me for as long as I have. So you have to find out the dominant person and try to get the complete family involved. Unless you change that, then they will not comply.
Sounds good. Thank you, Vidya. So, Senator, the next question is for you. The question is, policy development is very important in any public health, not just a public health program or initiative. Policy development, community engagement, advocacy, and then finally passing a bill or law that makes sense. As a health committee member in Georgia, how have you engaged your fellow senators who are helping pass bills that is more healthy, which makes healthy choice a real easy choice? Having medical health care background yourself, do you find it easy to pass laws such as smoke-free laws? Or does political affiliation comes into play?
That one.
Yeah.
No, really, politics is involved in everything. And I think a good example was recently the texting new law, where you have statistics that show that if you don't text and drive, that obviously you have less accidents and less fatalities. But the overriding factor is definitely politics, and smoking's another great example. It took a very long time to get bills passed for no smoking in restaurants because the industry lobbied against it, and they actually still lobby against it. When you look at casinos and different industries that rely upon people sitting in a chair and smoking a cigarette and drinking alcohol, you know, it's a lot of industry involved money that lobbies against public health initiatives. And it's very difficult. It's difficult when you come from an industry that is medical related and you know best practices and you know statistics and you know analysis. It's very difficult and frustrating. You just want to shake someone and say, yeah, but. And it doesn't work that way because there's probably 1,000 people in the hall that are lobbying as lobbyists against you. So it is very difficult. What I've found is that preventive medicine gets a back seat to medicine that is reactive. That we create study committees, we create laws about different initiatives, but it's not about preventive medicine. And it's much more prudent in the state budget and using the taxpayers' dollars if you do preventive medicine. But it never gets the forefront and never becomes a priority. It's always reactive medicine. And I could give you a couple of examples of that. In the evolution of healthcare in the state of Georgia, we created different levels of care at hospital systems in the infrastructure. So you have tiers of hospitals that are trauma 1, trauma 2, trauma 3, trauma 4. Well, we recently had 2 different big initiatives around cardiovascular medicine, but before cardiovascular medicine came up, it was about stroke prevention, and much more money went into strokes and embolisms related to the brain and other different parts, thromboembolisms. And then, fortunately, cardiovascular medicine came in. And when I say this, I'm talking about that trauma system, well, then you have a stroke prevention system. So that if you know you go to this hospital, it is certified to be stroke prevented at level 2 or level 1 or level 3. Well, cardiovascular, we just recently, last year, evolved into a level system of that. So that if you know you go down the street here at Johns Creek or you go over here to Northside Hospital or you go to Emory, you know you're going to get a different level of cardiovascular care. So it's evolving. Our state, and if you look at our state statistics, you know, as being the stroke belt, the diabetes belt, the obesity belt, the kidney stone belt, we have very, very low parameters in the matrix of the rest of the nation. And a lot of it evolves from poor health care. We also have a division of rural health care and urban health care. If you're right here in this area, you have a heart attack, you go to the hospital, you're going to get great care. But if you're down in Vidalia, Georgia, and you're 200 miles away from a hospital, you have to get shipped to Macon or Savannah, your chances of survival. I always tell people, be careful when you're on I-16 going down to Savannah because you're not going to have good care. If you're in an accident or you have a heart attack or you have a stroke or something, your chances of survival are not very good. So there's a huge disparity, and that's one of the main arguments that we're having to debate now in the General Assembly is that disparity of rural and urban care.
So have you done any resolutions or policies or laws in regards to the school system with the nutrition for children?
Well, one of the hardest bills we ever had was obesity in children. And we wanted to require every school to weigh every child and to develop a nutritional plan and to send that nutritional plan home with their parents. And that bill got debated about 3 years in a row, and it finally was defeated. And it's a shame because if you look at children and where their highest incidence of an intervention could be, it's in the school system. Because unfortunately at home they don't get as much care as they should. And if you're going to intervene and try to improve anything with a child, it's usually in the school system. And that's one of the reasons we provide dental care for the Medicaid children in the school system now, because their parents won't take them to the dentist. So there's been several initiatives. If you look at early child care and pre-K and the initiatives that the state is doing, if you look at counseling and you look at mental health intervention, it is now beginning to interject. We just had a bill this year of counselors in the school doing more mental health services. And it's because children are not getting those services outside of the school system.
Okay, thank you so much. So our question is for Shivani. Shivani, so let's talk about diabetes. I wonder who named it sugar disease. Actually, it's a sour disease, right? It creates complications from head to toe. But tell us, and of course, very predominant and prevalent in the South Asian population. Can you tell us how can one prevent the risk factors for developing diabetes? And if there are gender differences from your literature, from your research points that you can share with us today?
Sure. So I guess I'll start with this issue of the risk factors. And as has been discussed, when it comes to cardiovascular disease, men are at a higher risk and South Asians are at a higher risk. So South Asian men are at an extremely high risk for cardiovascular disease. When it comes to diabetes, actually men and women have very similar risks of diabetes, but South Asians as a population have much higher risk of diabetes. So in the United States, there's one study which is really cleverly named. It's called the Masala study. So what yes, it's a great name, right? Mediators of atherosclerosis in South Asians living in the United States. That's what Masala stands for in that study. So they, fancy name aside, what they've done is followed people living in Chicago and followed people living in the San Francisco area that are of a South Asian descent. And they've examined all the things that we're talking about today and trying to understand what are the outcomes among people. And so when you look at the risk factors for CVD, a lot of the risk factors are actually the same, but they're in different proportions. So diabetes is statistically, we can see it. It's not just anecdotally, but statistically we see is much, much higher in South Asians than it is in any other group. So they've compared the people that they follow in Masala to people that they've followed in other studies in the United States. And diabetes is 3 to 4 times higher when you account for things like age, even after accounting for things like age. So that's one really important part and puzzle piece of the cardiovascular risk story. In terms of what we can do about these risk factors, there is something called the Diabetes Prevention Program that is one prevention intervention that's been shown through a trial. So a lot of times when we just look at what people are doing in their daily life and we see who lives longer, who does better when it comes to disease, there might be other things about those people that differ. So some people selecting to adopt a healthier lifestyle that might make them different from the people who don't have that healthier lifestyle. So it's a different thing when in a trial we almost force people into a healthier lifestyle and see what happens. So this diabetes prevention program has been shown to, among people who are at high risk of developing diabetes, that means that their glucose levels are at a level that classified them as being pre-diabetes, and they were overweight. So this body mass index of over 25. So among those people, if you take part in this lifestyle program that will give you skills to manage your disease, but also make changes with respect to your activity and your diet, you are able to reduce your risk of diabetes by over 30% in a 10-year time period. So I think that's pretty hopeful. What's another hopeful part of that story is that you don't necessarily need to lose weight. A lot of the different both intervention studies and other studies that we've seen show that weight loss may or may not be observed, but you see these metabolic differences, meaning differences in our glucose tolerance, differences in our lipid profile that are positive, even without weight loss, when we engage in things like new physical activity and prescribed levels of physical activity.
Sounds good. Thank you. So, is that like a good news you gave all of us?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of good news here too. I mean, I can go on about the good news. I mean, another piece of the good news I would say is, diabetes. So not only is it preventable, what I've tried to share with you is that it's preventable, but you do have to be on high alert, as has been described already. Even without being obese, South Asians are at much, much higher risk of diabetes. So for example, if you compare India, the entire population of India and the entire adult population of the United States, the diabetes prevalence is actually pretty similar across the United States and in India. But we know that obesity is much, much higher in the United States. So there's the decoupling of obesity and diabetes to some extent. That's maybe a little misleading of a statement. What I mean is diabetes develops even in non-obese people in South Asians. So that's the bad news. The good news is that it's preventable. The other good news about it is that if you look at the long-term mortality effects, so in the past, diabetes carried with it a big disadvantage for survival. So you were basically more likely to die at a younger age if you had diabetes. That's in the past. We're closing that gap, though, when it comes to survival between people with diabetes and people without diabetes. And the good news for the people in this room is that many of you are attentive to your health. At least I imagine that's why you've come, that you care about your health. Hopefully you have access to health care. Hopefully you're gainfully employed. So what we see are people with strong middle-class backgrounds in the United States. That mortality risk associated with diabetes is almost eliminated. There's a mortality risk associated with diabetes that still exists among lower income adults, and that is a major, major public health problem. But I think the hopeful news is that with the right health and economic resources to manage our conditions and treat our conditions, a lot of the long-term complications and mortality can be averted.
Sounds good. Thank you. So, Dr. Taher, you touched upon this very briefly earlier. Let's talk about the diagnosis for heart disease, right? Usually we talk about the lipid profile, and you might have seen some numbers going on in the background slide. We've been hearing a lot about the heart scan, the calcium score. So for today, half or more of us have not visited the cardiologist, except we depend on the lipid profile. Is that the only way for a normal individual to know whether he's at risk for heart disease?
As a family physician, what I find out is there is a difference in men getting heart disease and a woman getting heart disease. I think in women it is more microvascular as opposed to the real Hollywood type of chest pain that a man gets and goes on the floor. Women can go around having neck pain, really tired, fatigued, can be jaw pain, and there are very many symptoms which do not really come up. So we got to be careful in women. Now in men, when I am examining men, especially, other thing is not only chest pain. It's the thing about chest pain going to the left arm, not really. It can radiate to the jaw, it can radiate anywhere. Once I find those symptoms, then I start looking at it, sudden shortness of breath. Then I refer these patients to the cardiologist, who will then decide whether a stress test is required or a cardiac scan is required to see the calcium and all that. I leave it in their hands. Once they find that out and they feel that the stress test is positive, then they go in for the angiogram, the arteriogram, and do that way.
Got it. So for an individual like us who haven't gone to a cardiologist, we come to you, you send us for a lipid profile, and that is a yearly test.
Fasting lipid profile and comprehensive metabolic profile. where I look at the lipid profile. And then again, it's not only just the lipid profile. As a metabolic syndrome, I look at the sugars also, if they are high or not. And these collectively, I try and figure out, this person has got a high risk. He is man, he has got a high cholesterol, he has got, especially in South Asian, you have high triglycerides, which is a fatty acids. So I look at all that picture in that, even a CRP, C-reactive protein, because it's all inflammation of the coronaries. So I look at the CRP, all these things in tandem. Then I get to the idea that, look, this person, I get an EKG done, minimum, get a chest X-ray done in my clinic. And then I feel that it is there, it is something which is not really pointing out to what, I rule out all the other diagnoses of chest pain before I embark on really getting them to the cardiologist and getting tests done.
So can any one of us go ahead and get a cardiac scan, calcium scan?
I don't really, I leave that in the hands of the cardiologist. But I would send them that if I was very strongly suspicious that this person is having some coronary artery blockages. So that is what I would do.
Okay, when we come back to the cardiologist, I'll ask the same question again.
Correct.
But thank you so much. Peter, tell us how, so a sedentary health style is very easy for most of us, you know, computer desk job, we don't want to lift things up. It used to happen in many, many centuries ago or decades ago. We would really stress to go to work. We would walk to go to work. And we wouldn't have the easy environment that someone else was there to do the tough work. How has that sedentary lifestyle sort of has reached this worse outcomes in not just heart disease, but even other chronic disease?
Okay, before going into active living, I would like to mention something. This February or last February this year, I did a CT scan at Emory University. I'm a believer of preventive medicine. So I do regular checkups. So I did the CT scan, and the cardiologist always say, your calcium score is very important. And that the result was, my score was 17. And I'm 72 years old. So I think I'm quite healthy. And the reason why I'm healthy is because I exercise a lot. Growing up in Malaysia, I ate all kinds of food. My neighbors are Indians and Malays and Eurasians and Chinese and whatnot. I ate all kinds of food. Southeast Asian foods are very good, but some of them are very bad. Since 20 years ago, I had not touched anything that's deep fried. I think deep fried foods is one of the worst in the world. Probably next to like salt, sugar, and rice. If you have too much, then get all this sugar. Now, I'm also lucky in the sense that my parents were skinny, so I had good genes, and I eat a lot of vegetables. I do a lot of exercises, and I believe in preventive medicine. There's a very famous, well-known English saying, 1 ounce of prevention is better than 1 pound of cure. And we should always remember that. Now, when it comes to eating, you want to make sure that you eat, not only you're eating the right stuff, but after eating, don't sit and watch TV. Do some exercise, go out for a walk. And that's very, very important. Now, I play badminton, and I have a lot of Indian friends, probably more than 100 at the club. Recently, there were a few cricket players that had cardiac arrest, and they're like in 30s and 40s. So if you do not know this, it's time for you to check your family history. And be very careful. If you have some family history, then your preventive measures are very, very critical. But even with good genes, you should still practice balanced diet and exercise. Now, there's another thing I noticed in the US. We live in the South. Lots of fried food still. Kentucky Fried Chicken. They changed the name to KFC, so it's no fried. But it's the same stuff. Of course, you can eat some of this, but if you eat it too often, you're going to get into trouble. Another thing that makes it even worse is that we go for a good, fat, tasty dinner or lunch. And in America, almost every restaurant, you go in there, they give you a glass of ice water. Well, you eat all this fatty meat in your stomach, and then you pour cold water into your stomach. What's going to happen? All this fatty food becomes, sooner or later it becomes flat in your colon or intestine. So I would suggest that don't drink all this ice water. Ask them for warm water or room temperature water.
Sounds good. Great.
I have a friend who inspired me a lot. He's a retired banker. He's 70 years old now. And 3 years ago, when he retired, he set a passion and a goal. He's a marathon runner, and he says, Peter, my dream is to run marathon in all 7 continents in the world. And he did that. That includes the South Pole and the North Pole.
Wow.
Now, I have a dream too. I like to play badminton, and I only want to play in 5 continents. So far, I have done 4.
Very
So
nice.
I'm going to do the next one in South America.
Very nice. Thank you,
Thank
Peter. Yes, thank you. And we do have a marathon runner or a dream goal setting with Dr. Tahir, so we'll come back to that soon. But finally, I can turn left. We've left the best for the last. So with Sanjeev and Umang and Gregory, and right after Sanjeev, I'll come to you, Umang, because I think your portion is very important. Sanjeev, what are your thoughts about what you see? And you heard today so much that people are dying of heart disease or sometimes without preventive medicine at a young age, in 30s and 40s. And probably research also says that this generation is going to live, if continued the same way, is going to live less, that parents are going to see their children die of chronic disease. As a young youth, among probably older than little older than my children, they're sitting in the back. But what do you see when you see advertisements that promote smoking? What do you see when you hear about drug abuse, which we hear from the back end are happening in schools now it's as well, which can, of course, lead to chronic diseases later?
Well, luckily, when it comes to smoking in itself, a lot of times today, that has dropped a lot drastically, especially with teenagers. In fact, within the past 25 years, I believe it's gone from 30% of teenagers using cigarettes and smoking tobacco to 10%. So it has been a lot of awareness as well as that's been brought upon. However, it has gone to the alternative of vaping, e-cigarettes, and other methods that, because they were developed really recently, we don't necessarily know the long-term effects of what they could do. However, e-cigarettes, with tobacco, there's still that use that's being there. But however, the awareness is still being brought upon, and especially for students, I think at a young age it's going to be more so not necessarily with smoking would be the issue, but with early onset obesity from a childhood. Because what we do with WholeFit is that we go to different elementary schools, we've gone to middle schools, and we've talked to them about their own experience when it comes to living a healthy lifestyle. Because obviously as a kid, they run around a lot, and they're very energetic because they have nothing else on their time. But as they grow older, their activity levels decrease a lot. Because workload in schools increase, stress from family increases, so they don't necessarily allocate enough time to do that. However, their unhealthy eating habits, from Halloween as a kid to weekends at McDonald's turning into every other day at McDonald's, that doesn't stop. It's a lot more convenient for them. It's a lot cheaper for them. Especially getting into high school, it gets exponentially worse. And at such a young age, your metabolic rate is so high, as well as a lot of these students don't see the actual effects on their body at such a young age, so they think it's fine. And that's actually a big trend that we've noticed at my high school, other high schools, is that all these students don't see the long-term effects of what they're doing. But it's not until they get into college where they get that first freshman 15 pounds and they gain all that weight from the college cafeteria and not losing it, and it stays on. And then that piles up and builds to the point where they get to a point where they have to stop a lot of what they're doing in their career to focus on their health, which shouldn't be the case. It's important for them to understand that when at a young age that they focus on these different topics and these different issues, but it's a slow work in progress. As a lot of times there are different advertisements from large corporations like McDonald's who portray eating these types of foods is cool, and then it's cheap and it's nice. Eating French fries every other day. However, that shouldn't be the case. It should be once a week, all very much important to allow that in the long term. But in the short term, it's nice. But a lot of times, students don't necessarily see the long-term effects until it's time. So it all depends on when we start.
Very nice. Probably I should have you. Probably we should all have you come and speak to our children. What do you guys say? It looks like they don't listen to their parents much, right?
What's actually interesting about that is that a lot of times when we initially contacted different elementary and middle schools, a lot of the administration were very skeptical about having a bunch of different high school students come in because initially they thought we wanted to just skip class and come talk to these students during their PE classes about this. And then some feedback that we got from them before we even started was that they already had teachers teaching this content. So what's the point of getting someone who doesn't have any degree from college to teach students about this stuff? Well, during our initial classes, we noticed that a lot of these students took a deeper interest in what we were talking about because we were their peers. We were closer to their age. So a lot of times, like when I was in middle school, when going into health class and learning these different topics, I was only just filling out some tests and quizzes, and I never necessarily learned the content because all I needed was an A in the class. But when I heard it from someone else that was my age, and when I could see them listening to us and understanding that it's actually important to eat your vegetables, it's important to work out, and why that's important. And that it's not just exercising, but you can do different fun things to get that workout in. It has a different appreciation to it, as it all depends on where the information is coming from. So that was a really big takeaway that we got. And I'm glad that we were able to change a lot of different mindsets when it came to some of the different schools we went to.
Very nice. Thank you. Keep the good work going, Sanjeev. Umang, we know that monthly salary or a monthly income or yearly income is very important. But tell us, how important is it to have assets? And maybe you come across many of those families who don't share with their friends the real status of the stress that they're going through financially, but they're able to come and tell you. Do you face such, and how do you advise them?
Absolutely. First of all, debt and taxes inevitable, not going away, right? My fellow panelist taught you how to live a little longer, which is all good. I want you to live a little longer, but plan, okay? Give you an example. Just a few weeks back, I was at a client's place. He bought a new house at a country club. Beautiful, $1 million house. He calls me in. He says, "You don't seem happy." And I said, "Well, you're 50. You want to retire at 65 as per my last record. You put the entire money in down payment. What do you plan to do after you retire at 65? And he's like, "Why do you say so?" And I'm like, "Your average age of your parents is 90. So there's a possibility that you may live till 90. You retire at 65. You don't have the money. How are you going to fill that gap?" Surprise. He came back, started planning, right? Second portion. The biggest mistake that we make, one of the things that my mentor had taught me early enough is, in this country, it takes lifelong to build your assets, but it takes only 6 months to a year to come down to zero. Okay? So one of the things that we all can do is have 12 months reserves. If something were to happen to a spouse, right, the other spouse requires 12 months to get your assets, to get your life insurance, to get your will in order, all those things, right? Another big mistake, people don't have wills. All the assets go into probate, right? But circling back to Nazira's question, your income would take care of day-to-day living, your expenses, right? What were to happen if you were to lose a job, right? What were to happen if disability struck? People don't know the real part of it, the real effects of it until they encounter it. And then when they hear from somebody else, someone died on the cricket field or an example like that, then they rush to get life insurance. Sometimes you may be late, right? So plan effectively, plan early. They say that estate planning is for the rich. That's not true. Estate planning is for everybody. Estate planning includes wills, living trust, power of attorneys, right? Go get it done. Start it. Start from somewhere. Start planning today.
Sure. So one more question before I move to Greg. Some of us get overwhelmed by the complexities of life. You said have 1 year reserves, but what about those entrepreneurs, right? They literally give up everything to achieve that dream. You said your spouse. We are coming to status where now single women and single men are managing kids. So how do they get to the way of life where they're comfortable, or do they just give up? Like Umang did say have 12 months of reserve, but then I put everything out because I'm an entrepreneur, and that's what an entrepreneur does. So do you see those complexities in your clients or sometimes even within your family?
You do, yes. You know, it's important to plan small, right? I mean, you don't plan 10 years from now, 20 years from now immediately. You take baby steps. You say, okay, let me first plan my first year, then 3 years, 5 years, and so on. Imagine this. You put $100 a month away, okay, by not eating outside. And I don't want to be sued by Sankranti. I mean, just put $100 a month away, right? Grow that at 6 to 8%. In 65 years, you have $1 million, correct? Now that's $100. Think about $500 or $1,000. Can an entrepreneur or somebody do that? Absolutely. So effectively, doing it small, doing it in baby steps is important. You don't do it all in one go. It's a journey.
Sounds good. Thank you. Greg, all you deal with is men, right? Of course, you're sort of the men's health, and of course, you deal with their spouses and all that, but you get to hear the real side of men. I've really not seen, men are told they cannot cry, they cannot put tears out in public, they cannot whine, it's for the women, only women whine, what are you doing? How do you console men who are in stress? And why do men always take those risky behaviors when they know it ends up in bad outcomes?
Wow, that's a heavy. All men in here who've fallen and scraped your knees, and someone came up to you and said, "Oh, don't cry, dust it off." Raise your hands.
Yeah.
Oh, and they say men don't cry. We have to deal with men. When we get men in groups, in among themselves, they open up. They're not going to talk a lot around the women. We hear about the prostate cancer and what they've gone through as a prostate cancer survivor, as a cardiovascular disease survivor. We hear about those things from men. Men open up. The biggest thing we hear from men is about the level of stress on them. And I think that's one of because we heard about what we can do, we can eat. We heard about diabetes, how diabetes is a cardiovascular disease now. We've heard about how you can, you need to exercise, you need to relax. And that's one of the things that we have to go back to, and we talk to men about. Say, don't try to go out and run a marathon automatically. If you can get out and take 30 minutes to yourself and walk, just get outside and you can just walk. We tell them to put the cigarettes down. Now we're telling the young people to put the e-cigarettes down. Because people don't know, you heard, how many of y'all know that nicotine is addictive? You've heard that, right?
Yes.
How many of you have heard that nicotine is a poison that's off the market commercially? The FDA took it off the market. Why? Because it was too harsh. Now we have e-cigarettes, and kids are being able to add additional nicotine to those e-cigarettes, and then they're coming back, and then they're having seizures. And teachers are confiscating the e-cigarettes, the e-cartridges now, simply because they're illegal for anyone under the age of 18 to use. So parents are having to deal with this, and husbands are having to deal with this. That's an additional level of stress that they're having to deal with. So when we tell folks out there, hey, go ahead, go for a walk, What if you live in a community where gangs have taken over? Hard to get out and walk. What if you tell them, say, eat healthy fruits and vegetables? There's no grocery stores, local grocery stores there. So we're having to deal with men in a way to where we're telling them not only do you have to take some of the stress off of your life, you've got to take the power back and actually promote things like businesses in your own community. And you should own them in your own community.
Sounds
Where you have to actually have fresh fruits and vegetables available to them. Where you have to actually build up a safety zone within your own community. Where you have to take these things off of, because it doesn't matter if you're going to eat all the healthy foods in the world and stress kills you.
Right.
That's the same heart attack. Doesn't matter. That's the same cardiac arrest, as you said. In the end, you're dead. So when we deal with men, and we're dealing with them in small groups, large groups, we actually tell them that they have to connect with one another. All the money in the world won't save you. But if you build a community and you work together, that will help more than anything.
Very nice. Yes, definitely. The Senator has a follow-up. Go ahead.
One of the things that we've had to deal with in the last...
It's on.
It's on?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things we've had to deal with in the last few years has been substance abuse, and everyone is talking about stress, and men in particular. And if you look at public health and look at the statistics on men, and this area here in Atlanta is the golden triangle of the incidence of substance abuse, and whether it's prescription drugs, street drugs, or whatever, this is one of the highest areas. I was at a town hall meeting about a month ago with the sheriff in Forsyth County, and he said that every day, every single day, his deputies are answering suicide calls. It's either an attempted suicide or it's an actual suicide. 365 days a year, he said he gets 1.25 calls a day, every day. Every day he knows his deputies are answering a suicide call. So if you look at the incidence of, the GBI has been doing studies on children and millennials in particular in the high incidence of suicide. In the state of Georgia, we've actually had children that are as young as 6 years old committing suicide. And they're tragic instances. We have a fatality review committee. We had a little girl who stood in front of a train, and she was very, very young. So all the things that you're talking about, cardiovascular disease, they actually lead to other incidences that are much more drastic, and it is the substance abuse and the suicide.
Okay, thank you. So I have another quiz for you, and this time I'm going to make sure I get the winner correct. So the question is, when was the first successful human heart transplant done? So I'm going to give you 3 years, and whoever gets the first, already I see a hand raising, so probably he knows. So 1953, 1967, 1978. Who said 67 first? Okay, Auntie. You did on 1967? Okay. Yeah? Was that your answer too? Right, yes. So it was Christian Bernard who transplanted a heart from a 25-year-old who died in an accident to a 53-year-old man. So that was good to know for as a knowledge base. So Auntie, you win a gift, and I'm hoping Neelam will get here later to be here. But let me know, how many of you are CPR certified? Yeah? So do you have the active CPR card in your wallet? Yeah? You all do? Very nice. So do you think if we arranged a CPR session like in this hall, would community free of cost with community members, should we do that? Would that be of interest? Yeah? Okay, sounds good. We did that 3 years ago, and we had like 30 people certified at the same time. So we can arrange for that for the next session or soon, right? Okay, so Dr. Neil, what are the complications of heart disease, right? And if you can just tell us, like, once now the person has developed a heart disease, either a heart attack, but also I'm very interested. So, what is the percentage rate of survival for a person who has suffered a cardiac arrest? Is it good? Is it good prognosis, or
It is getting better in the last 30 years or so. Tremendous improvements have been made. Oftentimes, if the person has a heart attack and is able to get to the hospital within half an hour, and they can get on to the angiogram right away, their rate of survival is extremely high. And almost there is no damage to the heart muscle. So that's why we say time is muscle. Sooner you can get to the hospital, the better chance of survival. Of course, the worst complication is sudden death. And as Ms. Hunterman was saying, if you are in a rural area, your chance of survival is poor. And farther away you are from the hospital, it's poor. Farther away from a big hospital, good hospital, it's poor. So a lot of factors, your socioeconomic factors. If you come from a poor family where you cannot afford medicines, it's poor. A lot of patients I know have a heart attack, they go home, the doctor gives a prescription, they cannot fill the prescription because they don't have the money. Oftentimes I've seen people, they fill a prescription for 1 week, then they go back and get another week. They take the medicine that they're supposed to take every day, every other day. So a lot of those socioeconomic factors take in. I think the common complications is congestive heart failure. The heart muscle gets weaker, it cannot pump like it should, so the body starts retaining fluid. And that leads to a set of other complications, including renal failure, kidney failure. And this can lead to, if you're an earning member in the family, that can cause a lot of stress in the family. It can lead to depression, disability, on and on. And if you had a heart attack, it's a problem of the blood vessel. So when you have a problem with the blood vessel in the heart, and you are at high risk of having a problem elsewhere. It can be in the neck with the carotid that can cause stroke. It can be the legs, it can be the pelvis, lead to peripheral vascular disease. That leads to a whole set of different complications.
okay? So let's talk about the person who was in the fair cricket ground. So looks like they collapsed with a cardiac arrest. What could have the fellow men done, or do you think the cricketer had some leeway time to let the people know what had happened? Because it's just a common field. We go for playground every day.
Typically, if it is from a heart attack, and if you start a CPR and somebody calls a 911, if you had a ACLS certified person, they can keep doing the CPR until the help arrives, and your chance of survival is high. And the other issue, when you have a sudden death in an 18-year-old playing football and dies, usually there's an arrhythmic death. The heart suddenly becomes irregular, and instead of beating 72 times a minute, you start beating 400, 500, 600 times a minute. Virtually, the heart muscle is not beating. When even the heart muscle is beating so fast, it cannot pump blood, and that leads to collapse and sudden death.
So could it have been prevented, or CPR, anything could have been done? So my question is, can anything be done for a person who's going to have a cardiac arrest, or we know is a cardiac arrest?
Yes, the research has been done in men when they die suddenly, when they go back and examine and take the history from friends, from the family, from the employees, or rather employers, usually they've had symptoms which they ignore. I'm good, I have no problem, I'm healthy. And this is very typical with Indians. When I see Indian patients, when you ask them, I'm good, I have no problem. So why are you here? And it's a very common issue, which I do not see in other cultures. I do not see with white folks, I do not see with African Americans, but it's a very common thing, And typically, it's wife that drags the men to the doctor, because women decide the health care in the family, and that's a good thing. And if it's a man deciding, I think most of them will be dead.
Thank you. Thank you. So before we go to the next question with Dr. Ashfaq, I have a quick announcement. I also want to acknowledge our Japanese consulate. Thank you, Thomas Takashi, for being here. And so Neelam, if you can come up front. So Neelam has been our intern for the last 1.5 years or so. She graduated from her public health. So we are happy to announce that she got into, Neelam, if you can come up front, she got into CDC. She will be moving to Chicago for a CDC job offer. So I would like, quickly, if you can just give me 1 minute to thank her for her service and for being here. I'm gonna miss her. And if I want to call Nila and Rasi up front because I want y'all, and also Sai's mom. I don't know your name, Auntie. Please come forward. Please come forward. I want you to get this bouquet, this basket of flowers, joy, health, wealth, peace, and everything from the youngest, and Sanjeev, from the youngest to the well-wishers. And if you all can hold it together. Auntie, come. Sorry, I'm not making it dramatic, but this is how I feel that she needs. And if you want to hold and give it to, yeah, hold it. And I want you all to hold the basket and give it to Neelam. So we want to all wish you the best. And do you have just one quick word quickly because I know, yeah, sure. Quickly, Neelam.
I did not expect this, but thank you, Nazira. Thank you so much. I honestly could not have done this without Nazira's support. She's been amazing. She's supported me throughout the entire process. I had no idea what I was doing half the time. But then, without her guidance, I wouldn't be here. So I've learned a lot. And if anyone ever wants to get some guidance and learn to proceed further into public health or a nonprofit or even as a social entrepreneur, I would not recommend anyone above Nazira.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Neelam. Congratulations again. Congratulations. Wish you all the best and keep us all posted. Thank you. Wish you all the best. And auntie and uncle are also here, very proud parents, of course. So Dr. Ashfaq, and thank you for giving us a couple of minutes in midst. Dr. Ashfaq, let's talk about the treatment of heart disease. As our Indian culture or senator, we believe in a lot of holistic alternative medicine. But how important is it to take the drugs? I'm having practiced medicine in India. I do not like going to a doctor. I do not like taking medication, and that's the truth, right? I just don't. So I can imagine those who've not been in the medical field is taking medication for their heart disease, the the lipid drugs or any BP medications, diabetic medications. But once now we've come to a stage, we're moving to the next stage where a person has had a heart disease, either a heart attack or a mild angina, and they're coming to you.
Let's see if this is working. Yeah. Okay. So when someone has had a heart problem, I think the importance of compliance, not only with the preventive measures, but also subsequent medications and treatment becomes really, really important. So for example, a lot of times when patients come in with emergency heart attacks, they need to get an angioplasty or a stent. And once that goes in, it's imperative that they remain on a combination of medications, because it takes about 6 months to a year for the stent to completely heal, for some of the other unstable plaque to settle down. And so patients who do not take medications are at risk for another sudden heart attack. And so we always say there's a combination of an aspirin and a second antiplatelet medication that is critical after you get a stent, and you can't discontinue it. In addition to that, there are certain medications that have been shown to reduce the risk of subsequent heart attacks and subsequent other heart issues. So one of them are cholesterol-lowering medications. Patients who have heart attacks, who have other plaques that are developing in other areas, those could get worse. And one of the ways it's been shown to reduce that are these so-called cholesterol medications. And in the past, these medications were strictly considered to be medicines to lower the blood cholesterol. But I always tell patients, I'm not giving them to you anymore just for your blood cholesterol. Not if you have a heart attack, I'm giving it to you for the cholesterol that's built up in your arteries that you can't see and can't measure on a daily basis on your blood level. So forget about what your blood cholesterol is. That's really important. Even if your blood cholesterol level goes down, the fact that you had a heart attack means you had plaque building up in your artery. And one of the ways to prevent plaque from getting more unstable or progressing are these cholesterol medicines, because they stabilize the plaque and cholesterol buildup in the arteries. And there are other medications, that you need to take depending on the level of heart damage that become critical. But, it's hard to, once you've had a heart problem, it's hard to get around without taking a certain number of medications. Some of them are preventive, some of them are absolutely necessary for the treatment of the acute issue, and then some of them are for long-term health and long-term health maintenance that are needed.
Well, does the dosage reduce because at that time, once you've had a heart disease, you tend to change your lifestyle because it's reactive. Will the dosage reduce if they take on lifestyle modification very seriously?
Yes, a lot of times things can be adjusted. So, for example, the medicines that you get after the stent, one of them can be taken off after about a year in a lot of patients. The second thing that happens, a lot of times after a heart attack, we start on the highest dose of the cholesterol medicine because that's what's effective to get into the arteries and stabilize the plaque. But with appropriate lifestyle modification and healthy living, many times that dose can be reduced. Similarly, patients who really put a concerted effort and lose weight and watch their diet, many times their blood pressure starts to go down. So the dosages of the medications they were taking for blood pressure, hypertension starts to come down. And there are extreme scenarios where I've seen patients who lost so much weight, 50 pounds, 100 pounds, that they're able to get off most of their blood pressure medications. And, I don't primarily treat diabetes, but there are also patients who lose a lot of weight and their diabetes medications, their insulin requirements go down considerably. And all that has positive effects. So there is incentive to do the right thing because you may be able to cut down your pills.
Awesome, thank you. So I know, Dr. Tahir, you want to follow up on that one. I was going to go to Dr. Dan, but let's get to your question and then I'll get to Dr. Dan. So tell us how you changed your life.
Okay, let me just say that I was a victim of heart disease. I had angina, and I was also having a bad family history of heart disease, kidney disease, diabetes, strokes, and I was having a sedentary lifestyle. The only muscles I exercised were my eye muscles looking at the treadmill. So this was the state of affairs. Then I loved good life, good food. I overate, drank occasionally, and I had a type A controlling personality. All this led to me having a heart disease at a young age of 56 years. Now, at that time, it was not very important for me to, the most important thing was everything was in a backseat. Healthy living was backseat. What was important was my work and success. So what really happened? I became angry. I became anxious. I was not willing to accept it. I was in denial. I was scared. So depressed that my wife, who's in the audience around here, literally had to convince me to go to a psychiatrist. And I was now in a state where I was having these negative thoughts and negative ideas which were tormenting, playing havoc in my head, So I tried to have lifestyle changes. I went to Deepak Chopra, the guru of mind, heart and mind. I went and even met Dean Ornish, and who has written books about diet and lifestyle changes that can not only prevent heart disease, but also recurring heart disease, can prevent recurrence of heart disease. Now, most of the people have benefited. I did not, because my attitude my things did not change. And the next 5 years were the worst 5 years of my life. With all these happenings, I started getting physical problems. Things like sinusitis and bronchitis were my constant companions. I had other problems, multitude of other problems. I had chronic constipation, chronic headaches, fissures, hemorrhoids, and then eventually I had diverticulitis, which was a perforated. I was admitted in the hospital twice for that, and they were almost going to remove a colon off me. Now, so it was no wonder that I got restenosis because they had put stents in me. And I got restenosis, my stents failed, and they had to have an open heart bypass surgery. Now, under the influence of anesthesia, or the anesthesia drowse, whatever you may say, I promised the nurses, the ICU nurses, that I would do half a marathon if all went well in 1 year's time. They thought I was crazy. So what happened was this statement was, when I recollected this statement, this was a defining moment in my life. After the surgery, I was wondering, should I continue doing the same things that I've been doing? Or should I make a definite, concentrated effort to change my life? I chose the latter. And when I chose that, I don't know if it was my new feelings or the splendid care that the nurses had given me. My post-operative my post-operative recovery was phenomenal. On the third day, I was on the treadmill. Now, it was excruciating pain because you had just opened your chest. It was the third, fourth day. I was in terrible pain, scared to cough, but I was happy because I changed my attitude. I was happy now. I did not take a single pain medication in the entire period. And then I'm glad to say that in 8 months' time, I decided now I had to have some kind of a concrete thing for me to start with. And I was wondering, what should I take up? Exercise. I think every doctor should write a prescription of exercise. They should write 3 times, actually 30 minutes, 5 per day, 5 days in a week. It's impossible. Now, one important thing about exercise, a lot of people have talked about exercise, but it should be done under stress-free condition. I had a couple about a month back, and I told them that, okay, we talked about it, and I said, go and exercise, and this is fabulous. They went around, came back in a month's time, and said, Doc, that was a terrible advice you gave me. I said, why? What happened? He says, all the time when we walk, we are fighting and we are arguing with each other. So you have to have stress-free condition. Again, when we talk about diet, we all talk about diet. We all know that, you whole foods, plant-based diet, rich in legumes, beans, and all that, lifestyles change. But how many people ever talk to you about how fast you are eating? Have you heard about anybody telling you to chew your food for 30 seconds? Think about it. You go around to Europe and you go to a restaurant and you reserve a table. That is for you for the night. Over here, there are 3 or 4 turnovers. So what happens? The waiter over there, you have to beg him, please get me my check. Over here, the waiter comes before even you have finished your food. So the idea was I took small steps. I said, I got to take running. Why running? It's the cheapest of all sports. All you need is sneakers, t-shirts, and a short. So I started doing in small steps. Walked a little bit. Then I started walking briskly. Then I started jogging. Then I started running. And believe it or not, in 8 months' time, I kept my promise and ran half a marathon, the Nashville Half Marathon, in 3.5 hours. Grueling hours. And from then on, there was no stopping. This was in 2009 when I was 61 years old. From 2009 to 2019, I have done several marathons, even the prestigious Boston. I have done triathlons. I have jumped out of planes. I've done your Mount Kailash Yatra on foot, 19,000 feet. I've done Mount Kilimanjaro. I've jumped out of planes. And this January, in 2019, I did my first 100-mile bike ride. Now, so I got a second chance at life, and I'm not going to screw it up. I'm going to live to the fullest. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the inspiring, Dr. Dan. Thank you, Dr. Taher. We needed to hear that you cannot give up no matter what. So, Dr. Dan, this is something that we hesitate to talk in public, but tell us about if there's any link between testosterone and heart health, and how important is sexual health or communication between spouses important to lead not just a happy life but a heart healthy life?
I think those are two different topics.
With the short time, I'm trying to get some of the important stuff in.
No, sexual health is clearly very important. We have an ongoing epidemic of the immunodeficiency virus-related disease, other sexually transmitted infections, sexually transmitted disease. And we are, as you say, we are reluctant to talk about it, and so we don't communicate the information that our children need to have. We see resistance in the political sphere to taking the steps that we need to take to make sure that people have the information that they need to adjust their attitude so that we can talk about it. And these are things that need to take place in the home, and they need to take place in school, and they need to take place in a forum like this. And so that's one thing. Now, the effect of testosterone on cardiovascular disease, I'm going to leave to one of the cardiologists.
Is that you want to take it up, Dr. Neil? Sure.
There have been several studies showing that in women, the female hormones are protective for the heart up to the age of 70. After the age of 70, they rapidly, men and women, get together. So until the menopause, absolute protection compared to men. Then gradually it goes up, and after 70 it's easy. Testosterone is a risk factor. It's been proven again by the studies. And the type A personality being much more prevalent in men, that also leads to the high risk.
Okay, sounds good. So, Vidya, let's talk about mental health. That's another topic that we are very reluctant to talk about within our community, even within our families. And we earlier talked about you cannot even shed tears and some of those taboo. But tell me, what are the common signs of depression in men? And are we doing enough to address the gap in identifying, not just identifying, but also treating depression? Because very commonly in our world, we say mental doctor, I don't want to go to a mental doctor. How do we work through those taboo if we want a heart healthy life or a family?
But mental health, like you said, that's a big taboo. So one of the first things is to understand that mental health is just like your physical health. You have a fever, you go see a doctor. So if you are not feeling, if you have an innate sense of sadness, you're just standing there and you're like, okay, my life is going well, but I'm very sad. You see? So when you have feelings like that, we should be open, and the stigma, main thing is education, community-wise. We should take away the stigma. So once we take away and educate people that mental health is a very vital part of who you are, then it's going to be very difficult to help people. So, depression, especially in the modern day when everything is defined by success, people set too high bars, and a lot of times success and happiness is equated to wealth. You don't have to be wealthy to be happy. And that's one of the main things as we come across and I see in people, they feel like, okay, they always compare. Well, he has this, I don't, so I'm a failure. And women, and this is quite common to men and women. And men, on top of that, with women getting more educated and coming up and being equivalent to men in a lot of ways, they can't seem to handle it because they've never been in the situation. So they want everything to be equal, but at the same time, you know, they like the woman, they like the money, they like her, you know, being equal partners in everything. But there are certain things when it comes to it, like, okay, so we are partners in everything, so why don't you, you know, do, say, household work or anything similar to that? Then it becomes, you know, something that they cannot accept. And when that happens, anger sets in, they get irritable, they get sleepless, they have headaches, they have mood swings. And I think a lot of that is communication. If only we can talk to each other, what is bothering you? You know, if we can just open up that line of communication, I think that will solve a lot of problems. And this goes equally, like I said, I wouldn't just blame the men, but I would blame a lot of women. Because I think as women, we wanted a lot of freedom. Men were kind of smart. You can have the freedom, but I didn't say that I will take away the rest of your job as well. So you can have it and you can eat it too. So it becomes difficult. And then there's a simmering underlying tension all the time. And that translates to your kids as well, because they watch you. Kids learn from us. So they just assume a dad yelling at mom, or this is how the situation is. Tomorrow I grow up, this is how I treat a woman. You see? So we have to be very, very conscious of that fact. And I think as much as we put in an effort into a lot of things, we need to spend family time. Just watch out for those, how do I say it? They're not signs that are there, but if you don't communicate with a person, or if you live in the same space as two strangers, then each of you have your own life. You don't see these subtle things. All of a sudden, they're very quiet. They would love to do certain things, or they'd love to go to people's house. Oh, I don't want to go. You just go by yourself. Small, small changes, mood swings. For no reason, you get angry. You yell at a child. Any of these subtle changes should clue us in that the person is going through something. Stress, depression, they get very quiet. So then we have to try and talk about it and not make it like a stigma, but say, okay, we realize we have an issue, let's face it. So I think education and taking away the stigma is one of the main ways where we can try to, you know, help people address this
mental health.
And I think it has to come a lot as kids, especially in this country, like everything we have talked about so far, we have to catch them young, because everything starts. And as parents, one of the things we have to do is we need to stop putting so much stress on our children, because you have to have realistic expectation, and I'm insisting on the realistic part of it. You hated it when you were in India and your parents said you have three choices. You become an engineer, you become a doctor, or you become an accountant, right? If you're a woman, you had lesser choices. So when we have come here, you have to realize the reason you came here is to provide something better for your family. That includes your children. You know, set realistic expectations. Not every child is made equal. Just because your brother's child went to Harvard, your child can go to a state university. Don't equate success to that, because you're not helping the child. Each child is different. Please recognize that and let them do what they do best. And that is very important, because they are our future adults. And if they get stressed out and young, then it comes out in various forms. So I think mental health is something that's very, very important, but we don't want to address it. It's an elephant sitting in the room, but we won't address it because of our stigma. So I think it's very important that, you know, we get to talk about it and people are comfortable about it. And again, education is very, very important to reach out in the communities.
Sounds good. So a question for all the men out here. How many of y'all know how to turn on your stove in the kitchen? Looks like we have a good audience. You know how to turn it off. Okay, great. Great. Yes. Sure.
When you talk about the elephant in the room, you know, and we're talking about the cardiovascular system, we talk about the microvascular system, which is your reproductive system, which is one of those areas that sends men to the doctor faster than anything else. I'm talking about erectile dysfunction. And oftentimes what we do is we run to the doctor and we look for a blue pill, a little blue pill to cure that. But oftentimes, it's like you said, it's the stress. It's a mental issue. And we need to have the conversations about that. And it may be because of some of the issues that are going on in the house, sedentary lifestyles, the things that we're eating. And if we just make those minor adjustments within our lives, those types of things will correct themselves. But oftentimes it's that stress, and we don't like to talk about it in public, right? Just say, the man can't get an erection. I don't want to talk about that. But we have to. And I think that's one of those areas where when men get together among themselves, we can have those open dialogues, those open conversations, and not just the barbershop answers. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you, Greg. Very important. So the next question is for our senator. You have an audience. They're all interested in making healthy changes. As a person in the political arena, what do you have to suggest to us to be involved in advocacy efforts? Or maybe there's an important policy coming up. Do you need the community behind any policy? How important is it?
It's very important. If you look at the state of health care in the United States and also in the individual states like Georgia, you realize that we're in a critical position. We're in a position where I feel like it is collapsing. Whether you have access to care, you may have insurance, and even though you think you have insurance, you don't have catastrophic insurance. You have issues like balance billing, surprise billing, when you have insulin that costs $400 a vial, and several years ago it cost $12 a vial. Healthcare has become a very expensive commodity, and unfortunately it divides the population into the haves and the have-nots. And if you live up here in Johns Creek, you may have access to health care. But if you live in Macon, Georgia, or like I was talking about, Vidalia, Georgia, you don't have access to health care. And you say, well, I really don't care. I live up here in Johns Creek. Well, you do care. Our budget in the state of Georgia is over $27 billion. And someone somewhere is paying for uncompensated care. You are paying for people who do not have care and do not have the money to pay for it. But that's also why there's an imbalance in the system, and your insurance premiums are so high and your taxes go up. So my suggestion is, because of these changes, when Obamacare came into law and the changes in the infrastructure, if you as a taxpayer and if you as a caring individual don't get involved and don't get involved in your government system, it's not going to get better. And I think elected officials want to hear your opinion, and whether your opinion is when you go vote or contacting your senators and your representatives and telling them what your opinion is. It's your government, and your government is only as good as what you make it. And these drastic changes that are occurring, the consolidation of the hospital system, the consolidation of the insurance infrastructure, all of this is very relevant to you. And you may say, well, I'm 70 years old and, I'm on Medicare and I don't care about that. Well, what about the next generation? What are we leaving the next generation? And I say that America is one of the greatest countries in the world, if not the greatest country in the world, but healthcare is a critical component of it. And our healthcare system is drastically suffering now. And so I encourage you to contact your local elected official. You say, well, it doesn't matter about my mayor and my city council. Well, I hate to tell you it does matter, because they have influence over your hospital in your local community. You may say, I don't want to talk to my senators and representatives. I meet people at Chick-fil-A. People say, I don't know how to get in touch with a senator. I meet people at Panera Bread. It's extremely important when you see this flux, when you see all these changes, that you as individuals become a part of it. Because if you want better results, you've got to work for it. And just like you're here tonight trying to understand and do better. Well, government is the same way, and you need to be involved.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Shivani, the question is for you. So you often travel between Delhi and here, and nowadays a chronic disease has become more of before it used to be of affluent societies, but now it has become more for low income and middle aged families as well, because trying to lead that westernized lifestyle of processed food and more sedentary lifestyle. Do you see the pace increasing more in India, or are we better off here, the South Asian community here?
Right, that's a great question, and I think a really timely one. So, the research I do actually specifically examines what's happening in the Indian population, and we work in large cities such as Delhi and Chennai to understand, in the context of the rapid changes that are happening with respect to the built environment. So, by built environment, for example, the increasing congestion, just that everyone who goes to India sees that every time you go, there's another building that's come up, there's another flyover that's come up, there are more cars on the road, et cetera. So there's shrinking spaces for physical activity, for example, through that one change. We also know, all of you who travel to India, there's less and less demand to fill our suitcases and take things to India because they're already available. You can get Nutella in Baroda now. I don't need to take Nutella to India anymore. So we have these globalized processed foods reaching India. The thing is, though, we can't blame it on so-called Western foods, because our group has done some research, and it's actually the Indian food stalls. So, for example, our samosa, our pakora, those are Manchurian. If you ask adolescents in Bijapur, India, their favorite fast food is Manchurian, right? So I had an American colleague who came to me and said, "What is Manchurian?" I said, "Yeah, it's an Indian invention." But anyway, so it is also indigenous fast foods, fried foods, etc., that people are, they're tasty by design, right? But now people have more resources to buy those foods. So we have this changes in availability, but also changes in the resources to purchase and access. Other work that's been done on this is we see that foods that were exclusively consumed during holidays, I'm Gujarati, so mathia is something that used to be consumed only around Diwali. Now you get it any time of the year. I go home and my mom says, "Listen, I've fried up a whole dabba of mathia for you," and I will gladly eat them, right? So we have these foods that are consumed year round. The opportunities for physical activity. Now no woman or man is washing their own clothes, for example. In India, we have washers there, not dryers, someone has to dry them, et cetera, et cetera. But you see that when it comes to mechanized labor, that's changed our ability for energy output. And when you see the food environment, that's really changed our energy input. And it's happening in India right now, whereas some of these things have happened in the United States a long time ago. So people like us in this room, we've either migrated or our parents have migrated to a very developed context, whereas in India, that context is now developing. So we're just seeing it at a different stage in the transition. And I think it's going to be some time before there's, I think, more awareness and interest in really changing, lifestyles, because the obesity epidemic, for example, anyone who's traveled to Punjab or Delhi, northern India, in certain parts of northern India, it's incredible. I wear an extra small in India, if you can imagine, because even the clothing sizes are growing bigger. So the social norms around overweight and obesity have also changed. So I think it's going to be some time before our cultural practices sort of catch up to the fact that this isn't a healthy way of living. But Americans, such as us, so Indians living and South Asians living in the United States, who I think have a lot of opportunities for these kinds of venues, right? This is a very unique and special opportunity to have this information exchange. I think that we do have a role, actually, in sort of changing our lives first, but also fostering that change when we interact with our friends and family abroad.
Great, thank you. Excuse me. So for the next question is for Peter. So Peter, I actually became a grandma officially yesterday. My sister, Yes, my sister's daughter gave birth to a daughter in India. So I have to prove to her I'm a forever young grandma. So with that said, thank you. With that said, tell me what are the obstacles that seniors face to stay healthy? It's going to be useful for me as well.
You're not seniors. But, well, first, let's look at our culture. Asians, whether you're Indian, Chinese, Korean, Indonesian, Thai, we are all Asians, so especially Southeast Asian people. We have a lot of baggages. One of them is that when we get old, becoming a senior, we don't tend to do a lot of things that we tell ourselves I'm not supposed to do that, I'm old. I'm not supposed to do this exercise. I'm not supposed to wear this. I'm not supposed to wear that. And that is a baggage. Well, people are living longer and longer life now. So if you're 50s, 60s, well, the AARP here, when you're 49 years old, they send you an application form. But 50 is the new 30.
Yes.
So think of yourself being young and youthful. Still do a lot of things. Enjoy life. Okay? And spend more time with your family, do exercise. At the very least, have brisk walks every day. 30 minutes or 15 minutes, doesn't matter. And you do something else too. Okay? I like badminton, and I'm a promoter and advocate of badminton in the United States. I joined 2 nonprofit organizations to promote badminton to slowly become a mainstream sport. We all from Asia, we know how popular badminton is. And I bet you, if you ask the average mainstream Americans, 99% of them will not know that this is the fastest sport in the world. The highest record speed of a shuttlecock being hit is more than 300 miles per hour. Compared to tennis, service, the highest speed, probably about 168 miles per hour. Some of the tennis players here know. But what I like about badminton is that it's a lifetime sport. When I talk to kids, when I talk to the American people, I say, well, here's a sport that you can play from 8 to 80. Actually, you can start before 8, as long as you learn your hand-eye coordination, which usually starts at about 6 years old. And, I'm 72. I keep saying that I would like to compete for the next 10 more years. A few months ago, when I was in Quebec City playing Canadian Master, I was inspired by an 85-year-old, and he could stretch and receive a return better than I did. We all know that, okay, age has certain limitations. There's just sometimes your body just doesn't listen to you. Sometimes you can stretch and you can give a return, but you cannot come back. We lose our flexibility. That's the reality of life. But that doesn't mean that you cannot do a lot of things you like to do. As long as you try harder, you have the passion. And I used to say, okay, somebody smash you and then you're afraid you cannot return it. Try it 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. The Chinese players, in order to perfect a return, they try it 10,000 times until they get it right. So everything is possible. Have a good attitude. Don't feel like I'm old, I cannot do this anymore. That's a wrong attitude. Another thing I want to say, and this may be a taboo, but India is a country of Kama Sutra. Sex is good for you, especially for senior citizens. A few years ago, I asked my urologist, I said, doctor, at my age, how frequently should I have sex? I was surprised. When you are in your 70s, you should still have sex once a week, as a minimum. So talk to your spouses, please.
Okay, Sanjeev. Thank you, Peter. My next question is for you. So what's the habit requiring the least effort with the greatest difference? Okay, and you can bring up anything for that. But adding on to that, I know you've educated the kids in middle school and elementary school. Who educates about healthy lifestyle at your home?
Well, the one thing that we notice is that a lot of times for young kids, when they're asked to eat fruits and vegetables and they're given different portions of foods, it's not necessarily something that they're taught, but it's something that their parents instill on them. So at a young age, a lot of times they need to eat their fruits and veggies before they can go to dessert, or they need to have certain portions of rice or grains before they can have other things. Or for breakfast, they can't necessarily have only cereal that's just full of sugar and then drink sugar milk afterwards. They need to have other things to balance their diet. But a lot of times, a part of that is that they don't necessarily enjoy eating some of these foods. A lot of times, their parents don't necessarily cook them in ways that are appealing. It's just something that they need to do, like a chore that they have to accomplish, which over time can be seen as a negative thing. I know a big thing that was interesting to me was that when we went to some middle schools initially, and they talked about how before they used to have French fries and other delicious foods in the lines, all that was taken away and then replaced with all these healthy foods that weren't necessarily good. A lot of them were blaming the Obama administration because of Michelle Obama's rollout of a new education system. I did look more into that after I got that initial feedback, and a lot of times was that a lot of the local and state governments were taking what the Obama administration wanted to instill, but to an extreme. So rather than stripping away, rather than instilling healthier foods and making it taste better, they stripped away all of the bad foods that all you can have are the good foods. Now, a lot of times when we did our Whole Fit lessons, that's what the kids initially thought we were trying to do. They thought we were trying to take away their candy, taking away all their French fries, burgers, and everything else. And that's definitely not what we made sure we emphasized that wasn't what we wanted to do. Because all that does is that instills in your mind that good food for you is not good food that tastes good. We wanted to ensure a balance. That yes, you can have your burger and fries. Yes, you can have your candy on Halloween, but you cannot eat like 10,000 pieces of candy in one night on Halloween. You gotta like distribute that out for maybe a couple of weeks. Or having burgers and fries, you can't have that every other night coming home from work or coming home from school. You need to have it maybe once a week. Because yes, it tastes good, but you want to make sure it tastes good for 90 years, not 20 years or 30 years of your life. Which, for a lot of kids, it's not necessarily something that they can see because they don't have that perspective. A lot of them just want that initial gratification of, I want my burger and fries. So that was the biggest mental block that they had to overcome because it was interesting that it was very ironic in the fact that a lot of schools wanted to offer healthier foods to make them give healthier lifestyles, but then the students in turn didn't have healthier lifestyles as they didn't necessarily want to eat those foods that didn't taste good, and when all their other options were taken away. So that was the biggest mental block that we had to overcome and tell them, you can have these foods, but you should also balance that out with proper workouts, proper lifestyles, proper diets in order to compensate for that. So that was the biggest mental block that we had to try to push through.
Was that give me in a few seconds, what was the inspiration for you to start Whole Fit?
Wow. So we started Whole Fit, me as well as two of my friends, we started Whole Fit back in my sophomore year. And it wasn't necessarily something that we had thought about doing. It just kind of came upon us when we noticed that a lot of our friends were suffering by themselves from stress. Like a lot of times at lunch when we talk about the amount of sleeps we get, some people say they get 3 hours of sleep a night, some people say 2, then 1. It feels like a competition to see who has the least amount of sleep, which they thought was cool, but I thought was horrific, getting that little amounts of sleep. And then on top of that, school stress and not eating right. A lot of people, they lost their passions for their sports and other things that they love to do because they always had a certain path to go through, whether it was because of family or their own pressures. So we wanted to lift this stigma, have the conversations with other teenagers and start it at such a young age, because otherwise that's just how your life is going to be. You're just going to think this is a normal routine. You're going to think that this is right when it's not.
Sure.
So that's why we wanted to open that conversation. We actually had this conversation at a pizza place that night, which was very ironic. But that's where we kind of brought the idea into place. And then initially we didn't think it'd actually work. we didn't think that any kid would want to listen to us. But over time and through a lot of hard work, it inevitably happened.
Very nice. Congratulations. Umang, so you talked about death and taxes are inevitable. So let's talk about the elephant in the room that many of us don't talk about. How many of you have an estate plan done or a will written or a trust? Okay. Tell us, for those who don't, or where we can go convey our message to our friends and families, how important it is. Because looks like 1 in 5 over 50 have always had conflicts about inheritance. Is estate plan kept secretive? Is it good? Is it a good thing to keep it secretive or work it along with family?
Sure. First of all, estate plan is like a whole package,
Yes.
right? I mean, it's just not. It's a work in progress. There's a will, there is a trust, there's your life insurances. You decide what happens if you become vegetative. You make that decisions while you're alive. You make that decisions while you are in a capacity to make that decisions. And of course, you want your family involved. One of the biggest mistakes that I see happening in our South Asian community is we see that there's a lot of husband involvement in making these decisions without getting the wife over there. Whenever I have a meeting, I only see the husband being there. It becomes difficult if a situation were to happen in a family where the wife has absolutely no clue where the assets are, who the estate attorney is, who the tax advisor she needs to go to, things like those. Now, if you do not have an estate plan, what happens is the state of Georgia parks it into a probate, right? And you don't have your wishes, and then the state decides what needs to happen. Well, there may be a situation you don't like one of your kids, right? And you may not want to give the asset to that person. So in that situation, you may want to decide before a thing were to happen. So it's very important to have one of those things in place. As I said, the common misconception I see is the estate plan has to be done when I retire. No, it has to be done before that. Another common misconception.
Like now? Like anytime?
Right now, yeah, anytime. Anytime we're ready to do it. The second thing that I always hear is it's for the rich. No. Estate is everything. Even your car is part of your estate, right? Even your house is part of your estate. So it's everything. If you own one asset, that's part of your estate. So it's not for the rich. You just don't define the number level. Everything that you own is part of your estate. And if you want your family to have a secured life later on, you always do a good plan.
Awesome. So before we move to our final closing comments, I want you to give quick closing comment. No, let's go to the Q&A before we go to the closing comments. Any questions for the panelists? Dr. Tahir, are you okay? Oh, okay, good. So I can see a hand, 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you, Vidya. So let's start. And let's make it quick because like probably 10 minutes for Q&A, 10 minutes for Q&A. Go ahead, Narayan.
There's a question for Dr. Nilgaru and Dr. Ash. One is this baby aspirin thing. They say after 70, we don't know whether there's a bleeding, internal bleeding, that's good or bad in the recent study that came. And how do one at a younger age, below 70, know whether they have bleeding or not, whether baby aspirin is good to take? Okay, that's question one. The second question is about the diabetic medication. How early should you start? And sometimes you think that the pharmaceutical industry is trying to push down on the numbers on the H1A, the H1C levels so that they start the medication early. Can you please, A1C, can you please give a comment
Yes, you
on
need the mic, friend. Do you have it working? Should work, okay. Who wants to take, so first question was for you.
So the aspirin question, aspirin has been used for both primary prevention and secondary prevention. The difference is if you don't have any known heart disease and you take an aspirin to prevent future problems, and that's primary prevention. If you have known heart disease like heart attacks and you take an aspirin for prevention of future heart attacks, that's secondary prevention. So the first key to take is that that evidence and what you've heard in the news is predominantly based on primary prevention. So someone who doesn't have heart disease, above 70, doesn't have a lot of risk factors, and they're just taking it to prevent potential future heart problems, they no longer recommend that as a routine. But that doesn't apply to everyone. So a lot of the patients that I see, and Dr. Neal used to see, and these are patients who have known established blockages, they've had prior heart attacks. And so in those patients, taking an aspirin still is important. And nothing with these recommendations would change that. Again, the other part of these recommendations were, above a certain age and also based on, routine use. Now, there are a number of patients, even within these age groups or at younger age groups, who have multiple higher risk factors, and there's actually a risk scoring system that can be assessed. And if they have sufficient number of risk factors, there is an increased risk of having heart problems, and the balance might still favor using it. But there are a number of patients who are just taking it, well, we've heard it's good to take it, and it's like a vitamin, and we're going to take it. Routine use is no longer recommended, especially above age 70 or 75, for just future prevention. But if you have a lot of risk factors, if you have high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes, a strong family history, I think it's reasonable to consider taking it in that situation. If you've had known heart disease, blockages in your arteries in your heart, if you've had prior strokes, if you've had blockages in your legs or leg arteries, that's a completely different animal. You're taking it now for secondary prevention, and those patients should still remain on aspirin.
Anyone wants to do the A1C question?
I had a question on
Diabetes.
diabetes.
Yeah.
Well, I don't primarily take care of diabetes as a primary specialty, but we do see this where the guidelines are pushing the definition of diabetes based on blood sugar levels lower and lower. Several years ago, it used to be, blood sugar is greater than 140, then it became less than 126, then it became greater than 110, So that's based on research and evidence that comes out of the American Diabetes Association and the endocrinology societies. And you'd hope that the decision makers are not influenced entirely by the pharmaceutical industry. So there's certainly ties, there's certainly conflicts that may come up, but as a whole, you'd hope that these societies can make decisions which are based on scientific evidence rather than just what the pharmaceutical industry is trying to push. Now, often what will happen is there'll be some studies which will show that patients who had once been classified in a certain risk level, maybe 20 years ago, the patients who were at 115 or 120 were not considered to be a big issue. They found that they followed them over, 10 years, and they found they had a higher incidence of all the same diabetes complications if they were untreated, or they had a higher progression rate. So those are the reasons the guidelines usually change, and they don't usually change just in one place. North America will have its guidelines, the Europeans will have their guidelines, there'll be Asian societies will have their guidelines. So it's very hard to completely, there's always progression and new knowledge that comes out, and based on this new knowledge, then the guidelines will change. And the same thing happened for cholesterol. Once upon a time, having a cholesterol of 200 was the magic cutoff, and they started going into specific levels with bad cholesterol and good cholesterol, and then the number for what should be an adequate cholesterol started to go, the target cholesterol started to go lower and lower to a certain extent that we started pushing it less than 70 on your bad cholesterol and things like that. So as new evidence comes out, a lot of research is done. Some of the dogmas that were there before eventually get changed, and I think that's what the diabetes guidelines.
Sure. So I'll take the next question. Oh, go ahead.
Just
Shweta.
very quick add-on. So, but if you're affected by, say, lowering of a threshold of for any kind of chronic condition, I'll just remind everybody that means you're borderline. That means that it's a great wake-up call, right, for some of the lifestyle management we're talking about, because it's we see it that with some of these lifestyle changes, people can go back to, say, a normal glycemic state. And the same is true also for other conditions. So something to think about.
Great, go ahead.
My question is, how is that calcium score is related to cholesterol levels? And doctors say after test your calcium score is very nice, but the cholesterol levels will be still bad. The third question is, I know a lot of people, older people who are 120, 110 years, their cholesterol levels are 380, 400, still they are living active life.
So how is that they are having bad cholesterol, they are able to survive even 20 years?
Can you give us your name? Chandrasekhar. So, Dr. Neil, do you want to take that question? Okay. Okay. Or Dr. Tahir, you want to?
But I just want to talk about the cholesterol levels. When you talk about cholesterol levels, basically most of them can be done by cutting down your diet or cutting down the portions. See, meat,
So he's asking about calcium score.
cholesterol.
In what way cholesterol levels are related to calcium score? I know a lot of people done calcium score test in recent days. It's very good, 0. But their cholesterol levels are still bad, like a 150. It's not good. as per the
That's a
standards.
calcium score you're talking
Yes.
about.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead. Dr.
So there is a relationship, and it's a bit complicated. So cholesterol is one of the risk factors for developing future plaque and atherosclerosis and heart blockages, and it takes time. So a high cholesterol level, combined with certain other risk factors, makes the inner lining of the arteries unhealthy. And that allows cholesterol and other inflammatory factors to start getting into the walls of the arteries, and there's an inflammatory response and oxidative response, and the plaque slowly starts to develop over time. But that starts many, many, many years in advance. So you can see fatty streaks in even, sometimes teenagers. And if you look at arteries in, people in their 40s, about 3/4 of them will have some early plaque buildup of some sort. Now, when this plaque has been present for a sufficient number of time, eventually it progresses in different ways. Sometimes it'll progress quickly and develop a heart attack. Sometimes it'll progress more slowly, but still fast enough to develop angina symptoms. And sometimes it'll progress really slowly. And over time, when plaque has been present for a long time, the cells start to deposit calcium in it. And then that can be detected in the form of a calcium score. Now, the calcium score basically is an indication of plaque, and then often how long it's been there, and sometimes the intensity or the extent of the plaque. The blood cholesterol is a snapshot that tells you what your future risk is. So you may have a 0 calcium score, which is great now. This is just a snapshot in time. But your cholesterol is really high, and your blood pressure is really high, and you have a strong family history. Over a period of 5 or 10 or 15 years, you will start developing plaque, and eventually your calcium score might start going higher. So if you repeat it in 5 years or 10 years, your results may be different. So there's, they look at different things. The calcium score looks at what's been present in the past and how things have developed. Cholesterol levels at one point in time are determining your future risk, something that may come up in 5 years or 10 years. So that's the reason why you're lowering your cholesterol level now. So they're related, but they're not exactly telling you the same thing.
Sure. So that answers a very important question, because I think calcium scan is being very highly promoted among the South Asian community. So does a good score of calcium score does not relate to their real cardiovascular health? Is that a right statement?
So you can't use the calcium score alone to make decisions. So, for example, if you're having symptoms, you can have some patients who have heart attack with a 0 calcium score. So the calcium score is more of a preventive thing. So what's your future, if you want to determine your overall risk factor profile. And there's been a lot of debate over the years how to use it. So in the past, they used to say, well, if you just start off with the regular risk factors. And I think now what the guidelines are recommending is it adds a certain value above your risk factors. So for example, if you've got your cholesterol under control and you've got your blood pressure under control and your diabetes under control, but you still have a high calcium score, probably genetically your arteries are still building up plaque, and you still need to be more aggressive with your preventive measures. The other side of it is the question you asked when someone's 110. There are patients who have different combination of genes, and yes, their cholesterol genes happen to be really high, but they may have really other protective genes that are preventing that cholesterol from building up in the arteries. It's not the same for exactly everyone. There's all these risk factors combined go into a melting pot, which combine your smoking, your family history, your activity level, your weight, your blood sugars, your genetics, your age, and all that is different for everyone. And the genetic factors are not all fully clear-cut and determined yet. There's still a lot of research going into it. A lot of times these things may be affected to a certain extent by your genetic level, by your activity level, things like that.
Very nice. Go ahead, doctor.
So my question is for Umang. So if somebody made a living will or estate planning in a different state, and now they move to Georgia, what do you do? Is there an addendum you put? Is there the whole thing has to be done again, or what's the process?
No, so yeah, there's basically some changes that you will have to do, but you don't have to rework the whole thing again. Either way, it's always suggested that you always revisit your living will, living trust every 2 years. Because assets change, things change, financial positions change. So you should always probably revisit every 2 years. That's always a recommended approach.
Dr. Gambhir.
Yeah, hi, good evening, everyone. My question relates to heart attack and heart disease symptoms. And it is about a situation which is very confusing and most misunderstood. That is, how do we know it, whether it is just anti-reflux or it is a heart attack symptom? Because the symptoms are almost similar and even same. There is a discomfort in the chest, there is, sweating, there is weakness, all those things also happen in both the situations, heart attack also and the anti-reflux. And by the time I'm aware of few personal cases, by the time you get to know, after even doing EKG and all that, it was being established, it was only anti-reflux, don't worry, go home. And in some cases, they to the contrary. But by the time you get to know that it was only anti-reflux, and that's what I said, I am aware of two cases personally. And in the hospital, even the doctors had already done the surgery and put the stents. And similar situations were there on the EKG and all that. So I just would like to be very clear on that. If it is possible, or even if it is not possible, the moment you go to the doctor or the hospital, I'm feeling chest discomfort, I'm sweating, I'm this, they straight away just take you, of course, for the EKG. And EKGs are almost, reading is same, maybe before, after, even after 20 days, 30 days. But they straight away take the patient for just doing these stents.
Sure.
So this has to be something, there should be some way to know whether it is anti-reflux or it is a heart attack.
We discussed this very briefly, but Dr. Neil, go ahead.
I think if you take 100 cases, probably you are right. In majority of the cases, you can tell whether it's a reflux problem or it's an anginal problem. Some patients who complicate, they can have reflux as well as angina at the same time. So when you go to the doctor, most of it is done by history. Does it happen right after you eat? If you eat spicy foods, do you eat and lie down right away? Do you have alcohol right after the food? So that favors more towards the reflux. On the other hand, you have those kind of reflux-like symptoms when you exert yourself, when you are climbing or you're going uphill, and it's associated with the shortness of breath. That favors more angina. So most of the time you can diagnose whether it's reflux or it's angina by history. And if it gets to be confusing and we're not sure, patient is unable to give a very clear-cut history, then you need further testing. Always err on the right side, safety side. We want to make sure that we are preventing heart disease, heart attack, and sudden death. Very few people die of reflux. So we want to make sure it's not a heart disease.
I just want to add one thing. In my personal case, I was in London, in Hyde Park, and this is exactly, I used to have gastroesophageal reflux disease that you were talking about, and I used to take a lot of PPIs, Nexium and all that, and it improved. But when I was in Hyde Park, I went out for a walk, and exactly 4 minutes time, I had that chest pain. And the moment I sat down, I was better. So I thought maybe it's my shoulder, it's my back, it's my reflux. I started walking again. Exactly 3 minutes and 45, 50 seconds, I got the same chest pain. That is angina.
With exertion.
It can be reproduced with exertion.
Right.
Now,
Stable
the
angina.
moment of a heart attack is entirely different. If a person over the years of 50 years and has all the risk factors and comes to me with chest pain, I don't care if it is gastroesophageal. But I will definitely work on that patient and send him to be further worked out. Because I can't take a chance. If he has got high cholesterol, he's got hypertension, he's got diabetes, he's obese, then I'm not going to take a chance. I will send him
Sure.
for further work.
So we'll take one more question. Okay. So Ratanji for you, and then one more lad. Let him finish first, Ratanji, and then you. And then if you're okay, because we started a bit late, 15 minutes, so we're going to end a little bit 15 minutes late. So if that's okay, we'll continue. Go ahead, and then we'll have the closing comments.
Vincent, Department of Veteran Affairs. One thing that I notice, working with doctors and active duty and veterans, how do we deal with men that are 50 and over to do preventative for fainting? That's another thing that comes up as well.
Fainting. So the question. Did you get the questions? Dr. Ashfaq, go ahead.
So, fainting is a bit more of a complex thing. So it's not a disease, it's like a symptom. And it could be heart-related, it could be very serious, it could be something minor, it could also be neurological. There's a lot of different things. So it's hard to prevent such a broad symptom because it could have a lot of different reasons why it may be occurring. So yes, a lot of patients are, you mentioned some of the veterans that you've taken care of, that you see maybe having fainting symptoms. I think you have to dig deeper and determine why they're having those symptoms. And based on what the underlying problem is, then you can focus on ways to prevent it. So, for example, a common reason is the blood pressure drops when they stand. I'm just giving you an example. In those patients, you may adjust their medications lower. You may tell them keep yourself well hydrated or give them some sort of compression stopping. So that's one scenario. Another patient may be having fainting spells because they're having, some heart rhythm issue. The heart's going too slow or too fast. You have to treat that a little bit differently. Some people may be having fainting symptoms due to, maybe a subtle stroke of some sort. You have to go in a different direction. So you have to figure out why they're having the symptoms. You really can't prevent the symptom without knowing what's going on.
Okay, Ratanji, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. First, I want to say thank you, Naziraji, for an excellent panel and for moderating it so well, and all of you on the panel who have discussed so many different topics that, sometimes it's difficult to say. I had thoughts on each one of them, and a lot of them got answered as it went along. I've been acutely aware of the both diabetes and the heart issues ever since I was 10 years old when I lost my father to both those diseases. And so I've kind of tried to maintain my life being very conscious of the metrics on these particular topics. But it's becoming very confusing, as we just talked about, is you hear about what are the numbers, right? I'm a numbers kind of a guy. Show me the number, right? And is the cholesterol 200? Is it less? Is it, what is it? I'm still trying to figure out the difference between, diabetes type 1 or type 2. I still don't get the whole thing. But I'm trying to self-medicate. I'm talking to doctors, and I'm trying to reduce I want to work out more and have more exercise and stuff. My question is, when it gets to the point of cholesterol, and you were talking about it, how much of it is body produced and how much of it is what you intake? Because when I was told to take statins to control my cholesterol, it wasn't coming under control. But when he added ezetimibe to it, which is to control the other side of it, it went down dramatically to the point that the doctor said, oh my gosh, how did this happen? Right? So how much of this is just, all right, let's try it. It's not what your body is producing, but what your intake is from a food standpoint. And where do you get this number that says this is the number for you based on your genes as a male who's South Asian? And you know, we keep hearing about people who eat red meat have high cholesterol, and yet most of the people in India who are vegetarians are having a high, you know, incidence of heart disease. It's confusing. And so the more we hear, and if I pay attention to one number, some other study comes along. You know, 30 years ago, they say Dr. Enos did the study, you know, on a, you know, for 20 years in a particular, you know, village and so on and so forth. But where do I, as a male South Asian who's kind of very susceptible from a family incidence disease, look at this? Because it's extremely confusing, even after having heard all of you today, right, for something specifically like this. Who can clarify this thing for us?
Dr. Neil.
It's as clear as mud.
So, you know, humans are very complex organisms, so that's the short answer. But there are a lot of different factors involved, and not all factors apply to everyone. So some people, their cholesterol levels are going to be very diet sensitive. So I have patients who, in fact, I have a sibling, and I tell him that who fasts for the last month before his annual cholesterol check. So it looks good, and then he eats the rest of the 11 months whatever he wants.
Red wine good for you. I've been told red wine is good for you.
So again, there are some conflicting studies. There were a lot of studies saying that it was good for you, and that there's some more recent stuff saying that it may be good for your heart, maybe not good for the rest of your body. But let's not get into, we can keep on going with these things. But going back to your original question, some people genetically produce a lot more. And the extreme examples are there's some familial genetic hypercholesterolemia states where the cholesterol levels, even in like kids, that are just, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years old, are very high because genetically they're producing a lot. And then the other people who genetically just absorb the cholesterol a lot easier. There's some people who just happen to eat good food all the time, good Kentucky Fried Chicken, and that's their diet, and their cholesterol levels are going to be high. So it's different for everyone, and the exact genetic factors are not completely understood. So you have to, and genetics is so complex that you may have one gene that's good for you this way, and the other gene that's bad for you that way, and they're the third gene that does something else, and the fourth gene that does something else, and they all kind of come together with this complex internal, levels of your own personal cholesterol. So it's going to be different so you can't really look at one thing and say, why does this apply to this person, doesn't apply to me. So the way around it is that the national societies come up with what would be an average for most people, and they've come up with, for example, the AHA risk scoring to assess your future cardiovascular risk at 5 years or 10 years. You can go to for example, the American Heart Association website and pull up for the risk scoring panel and enter the numbers that your age, your family history, your smoking history, what your cholesterol levels are from your recent physical that you may have had, and that gives you an estimated risk. And based on that estimated risk, then the therapy can be tailored accordingly. For example, some people may have really high cholesterol levels, but all their other risk factors are really low, so their future 10-year risk of cardiovascular disease may be lower, and they may not be recommended the same therapy. Someone with the same cholesterol level, but also a family history, and he's smoked, and has uncontrolled hypertension, the risk factor, the score, the 10-year predictive score for cardiovascular disease may be quite high. So the same patient with the same cholesterol now is going to be recommended, a certain level of medication. So there's a level of complexity to it. I think it's easy to say, well, I want to just, get a number and individualize it myself. No, you have to kind of dig deeper than that. And even when you dig deeper, there's more research that genetics, the family history component of it, is going to be understood better. And that's going to be added a little bit more into these risk scoring. And the risk scoring keeps on getting refined every few years. There's more research, and then you tweak it, and you kind of say, now we know how to do it better. Ultimately, the goal is individualized medicine. So you go to the doctor's office, they take a little sample, they run a genetic profile. They say, well, 10 years later, you're going to have a heart attack. 5 years later, you're going to have diabetes. In 15 years, you're going to have lung cancer. So that would be ideal, but medical technology is not right, not just there yet.
Yes, and Dr. Neil, did you also want to add anything? Okay.
Just a quick comment. When I started practice about 40 years back, I never saw anybody with a diabetes under the age of 40 or a heart attack under the age of 40. Now, recent studies that I read, that 20% of heart attacks are under the age of 40. And I see young patients, 21, 30 years old, with diabetes. I'm worried about our younger generation. What are we doing about those people? Because right now everybody talks, and your question about cholesterol, don't worry, my young friend, we are as confused as doctors as you are. We give you answers, but the less cholesterol, the better. Whether you have 140, it is better than having 180. And your HDL should be good. Your good cholesterol should be, the higher it is. I have 9 female patients who have got their HDL, good cholesterols, in the 90s. I tell them something else will kill you, but not the heart disease.
Very nice. Dr. Neil, before we head to the final
I think it's the complexity issue. Half of the thing is determined by the genes, the other one by the lifestyle. And when you combine all these things, several risk factors and genes coming from mom, dad, all when you make, that makes it very confusing. So we cannot go like in mathematics, 5 + 5 is 10. Doesn't apply to the individual. You have to dig very deep and get a detailed history, exam, and then decide what is good for you.
Very nice. So before we call Mr. Sehgal for the closing comment, I'd like to really thank each one of you for your time, your wisdom, your insight, and for a Sunday evening to travel even sometime might be from downtown as well, and actually sort of offering your free advice to the audience today. This session is recorded. We do have monthly sessions, and we will hand out the mementos right after our closing comment. Mr. Sehgal, thank you so much for coming here. You'll be surprised that we really didn't touch upon yoga or meditation, but we have Mr. Sehgal, who represents heartfulness. And go ahead, you can. You want to sit? You can sit, or if you want to stand.
I'm good. If you
Okay.
can all hear me, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I see some familiar faces. Thank you. It has been very educational, informative, enlightening session today. Thanks to all of you for coming here and doing this, and thanks to the audience as well. So I think I thought I will talk about the definition of heart. We all heard the physical heart, but how about the heart, which Christianity says is the ruling center of the whole person. It is the seat of your will, intellect, and feelings. And in our Hinduism, they say it is the vibrational field. At least one of the definition is a vibrational field between the chitta and the mind, or manas. And of course, Islam says this is the place in your body, in your system, which God has kept for the most important thing in you, that is your iman, or your faith. So there is that heart as well. And to me, or to many of us, if that heart is taken care of, it can, of course, also aid the physical heart. At least that's what today's scientists, today's neuroscientists, today's psychologists, they are talking about things like social psychology, the heart rate variability, that, the heart is important for your survival. But social psychologists say that heart rate variability also determines how you interact with others. Do you all know how many organs we have in the human body? Of course, there are a lot of doctors. I'm daring to ask this question in front of them, but I'll ask the audience, not them. Yes? More than 200? How many organs? Anybody? So, I had asked some of my doctor friends, and they all gave me different numbers because they said it depends on how you count it, right? But of course, then I went to the most trusted source we all have. You know what is that? Google. Google. I go to Google, right? Okay, Wikipedia. That is a trusted source. Of course, it said 78. right? 78. Of course, not counting the cell phone, which is 79 now, right? Right? But the first organ or first functional organ in human body that starts developing is the heart. So it is very important, of course, the physical, the spiritual, and the manas and chit. So heartfulness meditation that I personally have been doing for 28 years, and I meditate for an hour. That somebody said here that they run a marathon, but of course you can start meditation for 1 minute a day or 2 minutes a day. Same way you can start not a marathon, start with walking. So we have this Walk for Health initiative, June 23rd, starting from June 23rd, right?
I'll talk.
And for 8 weeks, there are some information was there here. And you all can start with 90 days of heartfulness if you like, and Walk for Health. So these two are, help you not see some of these doctors here or have the need to see the doctors here. And of course, still do the estate plan. I did it. This is very important. And thanks a lot, all of you, for coming, listening, and enjoying this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Sai. Thank you so much. Why don't you stay with us, pull a chair and stay with us. So I'll tell you quickly 1 minute about our heart health walking initiative, Walking Warrior. We did this initiative in our subdivision 3 years ago. And around 30 ladies came out on a Sunday morning and we walked for the next 4 weeks. We did a pre-test questionnaire and we did a post-test questionnaire. And the post-test questionnaire really showed very good results, such as they felt positive walking in groups. They found new friends among the groups within the subdivision. So I felt right now like we're mostly doing chai and chats. Can we get into action as well, right? Because the minute you come out of the door, your kids want this, that, you forget everything that was said, except some that are very serious take up some of the advices. So we said, if we are doing it group, we are making each other more accountable to walk. So we initiated this Walking Warrior. We already have around 5 to 6 coordinators. If you all are interested in being a part of it, we give you all the tools. We give you the pre-test questionnaire. You call your group friends or your subdivision. You would work with your HOA, so your email goes out. We will formulate the email for you and we'll send it, because we already have all the tools that worked. So if you're interested, reach out to me, and we will definitely have a day next month where we will start. And during this period of 8 weeks or even more, we'll have the CPR session, which we talked about. We'll have a diabetes seminar where diabetologists can come and talk about, or a nutritionist can come and talk about specific diets for a diabetologist that helps. So we'll have walk with the doctor. You can invite one of your, even chiropractors, alternative medicine doctors, Ayurvedic doctors to walk with you. The thing is, you can do it in your subdivision at the comfort of your place. You don't have to come to any place. So we'll kick it. So thank you for launching it today, Mr. Sehgal, but we'll initiate it. We'll sort of launch it in action next month in July, and we'll let you know, because it'll go out as a date, and you're welcome to participate. No cost, and you will find the results once you do the post-test results with all those that walk. We started with 5. Next Sunday, 10 came out. Next Sunday, 15. By the 5th week, 35, along with their husbands and kids, had come out to walk. How many of you all had walked on summer holidays at 6:30 in the morning with your kids? Yeah, we have something in common then. But no, I drag my kids along on a 6. Oh, with your grandkids. Oh, good. Okay, sounds great. So thank you again so much for coming.